Let's figure out where we are on the land development code. I want to first make sure that we have all the amendments. You want to hand another one out?
I really, really apologize for doing this to everyone, but this is my Amendment 1 updated, so you can take this big document that you have from me and throw it under the desk and replace it with this. Yes. So okay, there you go.
And is that including the amendments?
Council Mayor,
Yes.
Councilmember Kitchen, could you help us understand what you've done to it? Because
I'm
not alone.
Let's hold that for just a second.
Well, okay.
Okay.
There are minor changes that I'll be happy to point out when we go over this one.
So I guess the point that so let's do that. Okay, so I want to make sure that we're all looking at the same stuff. I have an amendment from Councilmember Ellis and me. I have an amendment motion sheet from Councilmember Flanagan. I have an amendment sheet from Councilmember Tovo. Questions 1, page question 2, question 3, and question 4. Councilmember Tovo. I have Kitchen, which is amendment 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. No number 4. I have Councilmember Poole. I have motion sheet 1 and motion sheet 2 and 4 combined. I have Councilmember Harper Madison. I have a sheet from Councilmember Alter, and I have a sheet from Councilmember Ellis. I think those are all the ones that I have.
Mayor?
Yes?
I'd like to ask my colleague if the amendments and all the documents you gave out this morning are the ones that we should discard.
Yeah, except you're just going to replace one, the one that says Amendment 1, which is the thicker one. You're going to replace that with what I just handed out that says Amendment 1 updated.
Okay,
Keep the rest. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the amendment. Okay. We're going to go through the amendments. We're not going to discuss them, but we are going to identify which ones people want to pull, either because they have concern with it, or because they want to discuss it, or because they don't understand it, whatever it is. And if no one raises any of those kinds of things, then for the time being, that we go into the document. I say for the time being because there are multiple moving parts here, and some of these changes are being made in anticipation that other people will be making changes in places. So as we go through this, if something ends up in the document, it's subject to being pulled out of the document later, if that makes sense, as we see what gets brought in and not brought in. So this is going to be kind of iterative, but I think that'll keep us moving forward. Ann? Just a kitchen, I'm sorry.
Just a question. So I'm assuming that if I have language that I want to add to a particular section, but I'm fine with the language, for example, in your amendment, I will just leave that alone until you get to mine, because it'll be additive instead of replacing.
That's correct.
Okay.
Councilmember Poole.
And then after we go through the amendments and this process here, will we be able at that point to hear from the speakers who have signed up? Or is that being held till later?
Well, we could hear from some of the speakers. I mean, I'd like to have us, I think if we could get through some of these, we could kind of narrow the parameters for people and they could see what was happening, but certainly we want to hear from speakers too. Yes, Councilmember Tovo.
Yeah, just thanks, Councilmember Kitchen, for your question. I think as I went through everybody's amendments last night and then again today, in some cases I can support it if I amend it, and so I think in those cases I'm going to. I think it's easiest to treat it like a item we're pulling from the consent agenda, just because I didn't write out a amendment sheet for an amendment to somebody else's amendment. So,
pull it because you want an amendment, pull it because you don't understand it, pull
Great.
it because you want to talk about it, pull it because you hate it. Councilmember Alter.
I'll be very quick. I just wanted to note that I just passed out a motion sheet for one amendment for question 2.
Okay.
Yes. And I have one for, another one for question 2, but other folks have a similar thing, so if those pass, then I won't need to pass mine out. So I'm not going to pass it out now.
Okay. All right, so let's start with the ones that we have handed out previously, and then we'll get to the 2 that were just handed out. So I'm going to begin now looking at the Councilmember Ellis and my Amendment A. So let's go through this and see what we need to discuss. Does anybody want to discuss anything on the first page? Councilmember Flanagan?
So this is something that is kind of threaded throughout, but my preference when we refer to draft 3, I don't like referring to draft 3. I think staff should be determining what the baseline is based on community testimony and what we do in our direction. So I would prefer to say something like, instead of, yeah.
So we're not going to make amendments now, so if you want to pull it, you can pull it, and then we'll go back and discuss it. Right now, we're trying to find the things that just go in.
So, okay. Yeah, so I'm pulling a lot of stuff, just for little tweaks, yeah.
Okay, so what do you want to pull on page 1?
Page 1, so overall scope, timeline, communications.
Hang on a second, you're going way too fast.
It's one.
So
it's
you're
all
pulling.
Of it.
You're pulling.
It's all of it.
What?
It's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on page 1.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all pulled.
Mayor Adler, if I
Yes.
may, could you offer a little bit of clarity about the exercise we're doing right now?
Yes.
I'm not entirely certain.
So what we're doing is we're seeing if there are any things that people are generally in agreement with, that it's like the consent agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go back and discuss 1 through 5, but if 5 hadn't been pulled, then that amendment would just be incorporated into the base document.
I understand. Thank
So
you.
the base document is what we handed out on what was it, April 13th or something like that. So that motion, Councilmember Alter, you want to make that motion for adoption of the base document? I mean, Councilmember Ellis? Yes. Okay, Councilmember Ellis makes the motion on the base document. Is there a second to the base document? Councilmember Kassar does that. So now we have a motion in front of us. Mm-hmm. Now we're hearing amendments to that. Mm-hmm. Mr. Flanagan has pulled items 1 through 5. Does anybody want to pull anything else on page 2?
I do.
What?
Okay. I want to pull, it's under question 2, number 1B.
Okay. Is A okay? All right, that one goes in.
Actually,
wait.
You guys want it. Sorry, 1A.
Okay. Here's my concern, and tell me if this works for you. I'm concerned that until we start making some of the base decisions, we're going to end up pulling everything.
Yes.
So maybe what the thing to do is let's take this. I would recommend that we take Amendment A and we go ahead and deal with Amendment A. At the end of Amendment A, then we'll double back and do the exercise that we were just starting to do. because that might make things clearer at that point rather than going through and pulling all of these things. That's the process I would recommend that we do. Yes, Councilmember Kitchen.
So, so that would mean for each, we're really taking question 1, starting with Amendment A, because
Correct.
I might have an amendment to some of that that's in mine. So basically, we're going that way, question through question?
If you have an amendment to the amendment that's in Ellis, then we would take it.
Okay.
But if you're amending a different section or doing something
Right.
with a different concept,
Gotcha.
then we'll get that when we get to your amendment.
Gotcha.
But certainly, this amendments to this language,
Mm-hmm.
but anything else that would be in, that would be absolutely. All right, let's try it that way.
Okay.
Okay? Does that make sense? All right, let's try that. So we have the first one here. Jimmy, you pulled this one. Councilmember Flanagan, you want to address 1, overall scope?
Yes. So one change is, as I've listed on my amendment, striking the part that references draft 3 and just saying the code revision process should implement the direction below. And then, so that would strike your addition from 1, and ours has language referring to leveraging community engagement, consistent with the policy direction, and references simplicity, which I think is important.
Okay.
That seems pretty straightforward.
So as I look at this, I'm fine with your amendment because I was going to say I like that. But I also would like to have 1 as written in Amendment A, because I think that what staff's going to do with this instruction is really work off of draft 3 from everything that's been indicated, and I don't want to mislead the community. I don't want people to be surprised if, when they see something in 3 months, it has a lot of draft 3 in it, and people say, wait a second, you were supposed to start all over again, and all you've done is give us back draft 3. I recognize there are a lot of things in draft 3 that don't work. So it's really important that they not feel bound by anything that's in draft 3 because we didn't approve it because it wasn't ready. And I want them to change that, and I want them to be really rigorous about that. But I also want to make sure that the community expectation that when they see something that looks a lot like draft 3 and has a lot of those elements in it, that they're not surprised. And when people say, did the staff do that alone in the dark rooms of staff building somewhere? I'd like them to say, no, that was the instruction that we got from council. So I would recommend keeping the language that's in Amendment A, but when we get to yours, I'm going to vote to adopt your language as well.
Or Mayor,
Councilmember Casar?
alternatively, could I make an amendment to his amendment to add the Flanagan language in, but leave the draft 3 language in, so we could just dispose of it all at once?
I think that's what the mayor's saying.
Oh, but
That's
you're
what I'm
saying
saying.
you do it later. Fine, we can do it later, or we can do it now.
do them both now. So
Just do it out all at once.
Mayor,
Yes.
with all due respect, this is wildly confusing.
Okay, then let me
And
do
for the
this.
public that maybe hasn't been following this, we've had various amendments posted throughout the week. We had a slew of them posted last night. We have slightly different ones in some cases this morning. It's just, I've got comments on 3 different sets of some of your amendments that I'm trying to collate. So if we're doing a couple of things at once, I would just ask if we could do them like A, then B. 1 potato, 2 potato kind of thing. As I understood what we were just talking about, we're looking at the mayor's language for question 1, overall scope.
Correct.
And then after we
Mr. Flanagan?
address
then
that, then Councilmember Flanagan has some
He's
changes to your language beyond draft 3.
Yes, he has recommended the change that is his amend question 1, section 1 overall scope. That's in what he's handed out. I would ask that at this point you just let that stay the way that it is, and when we get to yours, we just add yours. Only because I think that will be the simplest thing on the dais. You comfortable doing that or no?
Sorry, there's a lot of voices. I'm not comfortable with referencing draft 3, but I'm not going to make a stink of it unless other folks want to join me in making a stink.
Mayor, I've already taking the opportunity to make a stink, and I'd just like to be as consistent as possible. I'm also not comfortable referencing draft 3.
Okay. And I think that's true, and I think your points were conveyed that way. My sense is that there's well over a majority of the people that are, but I think we need to establish that here. So is anybody else uncomfortable with it? Okay, so given that, can we, so we'll just
fine.
move forward with number 1. Does anybody else have any problems with number 1? Yes.
So we're talking about number 1 as in your document, right, or yours and
Correct.
Councilmember Ellis's.
Correct.
And if we have additions to it, we're going to address the additions later? Is that
Yes,
right?
when we get to your.
Okay.
But if someone had problems with mentioning boards and commissions, for
Yeah.
example, you could strike boards and commissions. If there was something other than boards and commissions, so if
Okay.
you were uncomfortable with draft 3, that would be the time to strike that.
Okay, gotcha.
Are we not adding language now?
You can add, no.
Okay,
You can
so-
add language too, that,
Right.
but on that issue. Only because if we don't do it that way, then everything will
Understood.
flood in all at once. Okay, so there's nothing here that limits we're going to go to your amendments.
Okay, I gotcha.
Absolutely, we'll get to your amendments.
Okay,
Nothing
good.
limits that at all.
Okay.
As we will get to Jimmy's amendment as well.
Okay.
Which I've indicated I'm going to support when it comes up. And I think there'll be support on the dais for that to happen as well. Okay, so at this point in our deliberative process, 1 is staying the way that it is. Number 2, any changes to that? Okay. What about number 4? Any changes to number 4?
Number 3?
3.
I'm sorry, number 3.
So just changes, not additions.
Right. If it's a different kind of concept, well, then let's get that when we get to yours. If it doesn't conflict with this, if it's not a substantive change in this.
Got it.
If it's a new idea that say, hey, let's do this too, there'll be time to do that. Okay. What about number 4?
Mayor,
Ann? Ann and then Pio.
what do you mean about,
Let's go Pio first.
what do you mean
Yep.
about reduce citywide impervious cover? What does that mean?
I want to make sure that everybody knows that it is one of our values in doing this code that we want to reduce citywide impervious cover. And that's important to us. And that overall we're going to improve citywide water quality. I think those are important things. At the end of this process, I want to be able to say that we did a code and it helped improve water quality. We did a code and it helped us with impervious cover. Okay? Yes, Councilor Poole.
Mayor, when you said number 4, were you talking about question 4 or?
I'm talking about page 1, number 4.
Okay.
It's code text.
We're still on question 1. Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
Yes. Councilor Kitchen.
I think that we should pull this one because my understanding is if we want to talk about it further, we're not talking about it now, we're pulling it if we want to change the language a bit, right?
Yeah, if you disagree with this sentence and think that it
I want to
doesn't-
modify the sentence.
Okay, if you don't think it goes far enough, but you agree with this,
Yes.
then I would suggest we wait till we get to that place when on your amendments where you're saying, we did that, but I want to go farther than that too.
Okay,
And there is language going farther that I've seen circulating in places
Okay.
that I would support.
okay.
Okay? All right, then let's go to the next one, number 5. This is the one that concerns NCCDs,
And
NCOs. Anyone have, let's pull this one. All right, 5 is going to get pulled. I think that is the way I thought that one would go. Okay?
Mayor, is it pulling
Yes.
both A and B or just A?
Does anybody, A at least, does anybody want to pull B? Yes, it's A and B. Okay? Gets us to question number 2. Question number 2, any issues with 1A or 1B? Yes?
Yes.
Which one, or both?
Both.
Okay. So we're now discussing it here, which actually we're going beyond that. So let's talk about that. You know, I'm backing up because I started treating this as the pooled thing, and we're not doing that here. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the first page are in. So let's now talk about number 5. Zoning map, A, NCCDs.
Well,
Let's talk about that now because that was the change in process we just decided we were going to do. So let's talk about 5A. The intent of the section that was put in there was to let NCCDs continue, preserved and carried forward in the new code, because there are a lot of things in NCCDs that have been negotiated in those neighborhoods and areas like design standards and the like. And I thought that the general consensus when we were trying to come up with this kind of consensus document was that they should be carried forward. I recognize there's dispute with that, so we can certainly talk about it. But pulling it forward, this language also provides that as an overlay, in essence, over those NCCDs would be the changes that I anticipate that we're going to be making with respect to ADUs and parking, the preservation of existing homes, bonuses to ensure that, and the transition area mapping. That's the purpose of that amendment. Does anybody want to change that language? Councilmember Flanagan.
So I've got language in my amendment that talks about NCCDs being reevaluated in this context. And what I want to understand is where NCCDs have design regulations might be fine. I'm not even entirely sure what those are, size of the porches, but where they represented as significant downzoning of entitlements, then I don't necessarily want to codify that those zoning categories in those NCCDs are going to be one-to-one mapped. I understand what you're saying on the ADUs, parking, preservation, transition area mapping. But, I think it's important when we talk about NCCDs. I got an email from the current, I believe, president of the contact team for Hyde Park, based on my comments from this morning. And she noted that the neighborhood was built out with single family in the 30s and then was zoned for multifamily in the 60s, so before the current code even existed. And then between the 60s and I would assume 2002 or 2005, when either the main Hyde Park or the North Hyde Park were passed, so over 40 years, evolved into what it is today. So even though the entire neighborhood, according to the contact team president, the entire neighborhood was zoned multifamily in the 60s, it didn't immediately get bulldozed and turned into multifamily. It took 40 years to get to the condition that it's in that we recognize is great, that people point to and they say Hyde Park is a great neighborhood and it's mixed this and mixed that. So my hope is that we can look to Hyde Park as an example of how a neighborhood evolved gently and incrementally over many decades by applying zoning equitably across the neighborhood, which was then eliminated when the NCCD came in. So to the extent that an NCCD is design guidelines or other types of things that aren't just about the number of units, I don't know that I particularly care that much. I don't get any of those in my district, but nonetheless, I don't want to be codifying what was a downzoning of properties. To be fair to the folks in Hyde Park, a zoning that was matching the current condition, right? So they didn't downzone an existing multifamily and zone it single family, but anything that was single family was zoned single family, even though since the 60s, so over 40 years, it had been zoned multifamily. So I struggle with this because I really want to understand what we're saying we're preserving and carrying forward. Is it just the design guidelines, or are we carrying forward the zoning that undid the gentle and incremental growth that those neighborhoods experienced over 40 years?
Okay. So as a housekeeping matter, we have a main motion that's on the floor. Councilmember Ellis, do you move your amendment A? Yes. Okay, that amendment's been moved, seconded by Councilmember Kassar. That's the amendment then that's in front of us. The first page no one has chosen to amend that yet. That got us then
Well,
to,
I would like to amend.
no, it'll be the first page.
I have amendments to the first page. But go ahead and
They're
finish,
yeah.
finish what you're talking about now. We'll come back to that.
And we're going to get to everybody else's amendments on the first page to the degree that they are adding things. And so we're past that at this point. I think the issue that's been raised by what's shown on page 2 that Mr. Flanagan has raised is with respect to NCCDs. And what's in Amendment A is that NCCDs are carried forward, but with the overlay for ADUs, parking, preservation bonus, and transition areas. And Mr. Flanagan is suggesting that that be changed so that NCCDs are reevaluated in light of the balance of the rest of the code. That's Mr. Flanagan's suggested change to the Ellis amendment. Is there a second to what Mr. Flanagan proposes? Councilmember Harper Madison seconds that. Is there any discussion on that amendment from Councilmember Flanagan? Yes, Mr. Kassar.
Mayor, I just want to clarify, is the amendment the same language from the Flanagan, Renteria, and Harper Madison document? The word saying specialized zoning districts such as PUDs, regulating plans which exist today and are a type contained should be carried over. Unique zoning districts should be reevaluated.
Well, I would look at that. I mean, so I would divide the question on that. I'm fine with that first sentence because I think those things should be carried over along with the NCCDs, but I have problem with the language that begins with unique and ends with city, because that's what conflicts with the language that was in there.
I think
the
there's
first
two
sentence,
I think there's two conflicts. And the two conflicts are, one, you changed, I didn't read the next, so there's the unique should be through the word city and contain no F25 versus containing F25.
Okay.
So we should just decide those two questions. I'm okay with the word specialized all the way through the word citywide, but would also want to leave F25 the way that you've described, and I'm fine with cutting the sentence from unique to the word city.
okay, so I'm going to try and narrow the issues, and we'll hit all these issues. We'll hit them all. It's going to be trouble if we're trying to juggle them all at the same time. So one issue in this is whether we carry F25 forward. That's going to be decided to a degree on the question that we make about NCCDs. I think that, and I'm not limiting just to this, if other people see other issues that are contained in these language, we can certainly parse it out and come to it. But let's first make the decision in front of us on the issue of, do we want to continue NCCDs with the overlay? Or we could take a vote on continuing NCCDs without the overlay. But I think that those are the choices we have. But that's what we're going to talk about right now, is continuing the NCCDs. Councilmember Tovo.
Yeah, I have a lot to say on this issue, but I know that we have several members of our public who are here prepared to speak to NCCDs as well. So it's a little unclear to me whether we should actually have our deliberation now or afterward. But I guess, I'll be glad to say my piece now.
I think you
But
raise
again,
a good
I would
point.
ask-
I think you raise a good
have-
point. I think if we have people here that want to speak
Yeah,
on this
but
issue.
I'll start by but I do want to make one point before it percolates out there. I think, Councilmember Flanagan, you're citing the rezonings that were done in, when was it, 2005. It's my understanding, and I think the public can fill this in, that those were requests of the owners, so that, as you rightly said, so that the zoning would match the conditions on the ground. We have a lot of situations where in a neighborhood plan or in some kind of other general planning effort, there were attempts, there were desires that the council recognized to rezone tracts so that they match the conditions on the ground. It's really typical. And so to come back 13, 14 years later and start rezoning them back to what they were prior to a planning process would be a very odd diversion to take. But I think our speakers will be able to speak to this. But as I mentioned on Tuesday, we have an area that is functioning very well. As we look at the housing capacity and We've had lots of conversations about who we're trying to provide housing capacity for. We're a majority renter city, as I've pointed out multiple times. The census tract that Hyde Park matches to most directly is in the 70% renter rate of renters. I mean, that's who is the majority occupant of housing in Hyde Park. So I guess I really need to understand why we would be going into an area that has developed in part through this NCCD and take what has been a successful tool and eliminate it. It just seems to fly in the face of what we've said we want to do in areas that are, anyway, that's,
So let's hear from some.
and I'm happy to go through, I'm sure our speakers will go through this as well, but just for those who missed my conversation on Tuesday, Hyde Park is one of the highest density neighborhoods in Austin at 9,416 people per square mile compared to 3,769 per square mile. They have plentiful capacity still for further build out. They have a diverse mix of housing types, and I believe they can quantify this with regard to the number of duplexes, the number of multifamily properties, the number of ADUs, condos, in addition to single families. I think there are a lot of benefits. I would say, Mayor, it's not clear to me because each of these NCCDs is different, and I do think there is some consistency. As I mentioned, the Hyde Park NCCD, for example, allowed ADUs before there was a citywide ordinance that made revisions to that. The lot sizes are different. I think asking our staff to go back and recommend some changes to bring those into consistency is appropriate. I do think the transition zones, based on all of the different proposals going around about transition zones, would be a challenge for the NCCDs because Fairview Park, Nuna's NCCD, possibly the NCCDs that are in your district, Councilmember Harper Madison, I'm not as familiar with those. They have a transition. I mean, part of the regulations were to provide for a transition from the commercial to the residential, and so I think that does undo what was an important provision of those NCCDs. And again, as we have in both of those cases, the Nuna and Hyde Park, you have small commercial centers, you have corridors with commercial centers. You know, it's doing the job of providing for that transition. So I do want to talk about that piece of your amendment.
Okay, and we can start talking about my sense is, and the intent in doing this Amendment A, I think that generally speaking, and I know there are gradations, there'll be some people that just want to keep NCCDs the way that they are. There'll be some people that want to allow for NCCDs to go away for the historical and other long-standing reasons. We know that at the very least that Councilmember Ellis and I are not going to support either of those two options. We're going to support an option that is in the middle of that says we're going to continue NCCDs, and those NCCDs that are going to continue will be subject to those overlays. So my guess is there's not going to be votes to approve an amendment at one side or the other side. I could be wrong, but that would be my guess. Yes, Councilmember Kitchen.
Thank you. So there's a couple of different questions here, but I'll speak to the one that you were focusing on.
Thanks.
With all due respect, I don't see what you're suggesting as a middle ground, and let me explain why. I think that when we talk to, I'm looking specifically at the language that you all have that says code and zoning map changes related to ADUs, parking, preservation bonuses, and transition area mapping should be applied to the NCCDs. The problem it's really more of a question that I have is, in some cases, depending on the NCCD and depending on where we end up with, you're actually significantly changing the NCCD. So you're not really keeping the NCCD if you're going to put transition area mapping as an overlay. You're also not necessarily keeping the NCCD. Well, that's the one that probably, as far as I can tell, and I'm certainly not an expert on NCCDs. So I guess my point is that I really, really appreciate the effort to think where some middle ground might be, But my thought is that it might be more of a middle ground if we just said that we need to evaluate and look at NCCDs with these kinds of principles in mind, and because we don't have the answer yet. I'm not comfortable saying that that we're going to map all of these areas, all of these things onto NCCDs, because I don't know what the effect is.
And I understand that, and you had also expressed that earlier, so I would anticipate that this isn't something that you're going to be able to support. But where Councilmember Ellis and I were in looking at this was trying to figure out kind of the operational issues. I think we believe that if we're going to adopt as a policy in the city, a citywide policy with respect to ADUs, that we want them to be available in more places for people. If we're going to adopt as a city the policy that says we want to make sure that there are preservation bonuses so that it's less likely that people are going to tear down existing homes, and we want to have this preservation bonus in the city. If we want to say we want to have the citywide policy with respect to parking, applying citywide because we have a city policy associated with that, and the transition areas so that we get additional missing middle housing, then where we were saying, okay, we're going to do those citywide, then everybody should then be subject to that. I recognize that some people will disagree with that, and it could be that there will be 7 votes to say, let's not put any new burdens or indicate that we want new burdens on NCCDs at this point, and it could be that there's going to be a majority of the vote people that say they want to get rid of NCCDs. I don't know. I mean, we'll see how this plays out, but that was our thinking behind this as the place where we could get 7 votes. Or 6 votes, and then move on. Councilmember Harper Madison.
I want to make certain to convey to the residents of Hyde Park that I know probably feels like you're getting picked on, but I'm going to refer to this just because it was brought up. We recognize that Hyde Park is a neighborhood that's a staple community in Austin, but that to say, we also must be honest with ourselves and remember that multiple historic records indicate that the neighborhood was intended for whites and for whites only. These NCCDs act as de facto restrictive covenants that maintain the economic and racial segregation of the city of Austin. I'd also like to point out that they carve out special anti-growth exemptions for individual neighborhoods that only exacerbate the continuing equity divide between the eastern and the western halves of our city. If we as a council are truly committed to increasing Austin's household affordability, its housing stock, and undoing the wrongs of racism and classism that have checkered our city's past, we should not grant more privileges to those who are already privileged. I'd also like to point out that while Hyde Park might be 70% renters, Hyde Park rent is 10% higher than any other part of Austin. I'd also like to say I would love to have staff go back and help us to determine if 70% of the people in Hyde Park rent because they can't afford to buy there. That's all. Thank you.
All right, do we want to hear from the people in the public to testify? Let's call some people up to talk. Mr. Hirsch, would you come on down? Mr. Pena, you're on deck.
Mayor and members of the council, Stu from District 2. I want to share with you some comments that are a result of what I've been trying to follow in your work sessions and the Planning Commission deliberations on Tuesday night relative to affordability code amendments and how they tie into your directions today. There appears to be a lot of confusion about us changing accessibility standards. And if I'm reading your drafts correctly, the technical codes, like the International Building Code, which sets out the number of accessible parking spaces related to the number of parking spaces on standard, none of this changes from the action on your agenda today. And so the only way you get to a potential conflict with Americans with Disability Act or the Fair Housing Act is if you were trying to put something in your ordinances that conflicted with state law, but I haven't seen anything on the message board that suggests that. So I've given you a package that shows you what the accessibility standards are now and what will happen if your direction at the end of today is to eliminate all parking, for example, which may be one of the things on the table or may not be, what that would look like in terms of its interface with the technical codes, and what will it look like if on all the sites we'll have at least one parking space. So I wanted to highlight that for you. I also want to tell you what I think you all know anyway, because you support housing affordability. The more that we entitle the land without linking it to affordability, the more valuable the land is and the more expensive the land is. I live in District 2. We are a 55% homeownership district. Our housing sales price is $100,000 below the citywide sales average, and our income level is $30,000 below the city median income. So we're doing something in District 2, which is a lot of us are living in 1970s subdivisions and 70s, 80s kinds of subdivisions with relatively small lots and homes that are generally not being demolished except when they're being removed from the floodplain. And I'm hoping that we end up at the end of the day with the kind of opportunities citywide that a lot of us now have in District 2. I didn't buy my first house until I was a renter here for 40 years, and I was 65 years old and can claim a senior exemption. So it takes a while for it to get to down payment. But I want to see a lot of other people who aspire to be first-time home buyers and not have to leave the city to go to Kyle or Buda or Manor or some other place to be able to remain here. So when you give directions, please take those goals into account. Thank you very much.
Mayor, I have a question
Yes.
for Mr. Hirsch. Thank you for the pages from the International Building Code. Could you clarify for me? I'm looking at the 2 pages that you have here. If no parking is, and it shows that if you have 51 to 75 units, for example, then the minimum required number of that's for roll-in showers, and then where is the which is the parking? Is it on the next page?
Parking is in the third column for there's 2 parking tables. One is for housing. That is table 1107.6.1.1, column 3, and it says if you provide 1 to 25 spaces, then you're required to have 1 accessible unit. And then on the last page, accessible parking requirements. So that talks about accessible units.
Right.
On the last page, accessible parking spaces are a function of total spaces provided,
Right.
not total spaces required. So the only way you end up with no accessible parking spaces on a site is if you don't put any on there in the first place because you're not required to.
Exactly, which was the point. That was what I had understood as well. And I think that some of the concerns that we have been hearing from the community of folks who have disabilities is that there is the potential, and we have talked about this repeatedly in work sessions and everything, we don't want it to happen, that those folks inadvertently don't have a place for them to park their vehicles when you recognize that sometimes that is about the only way that they can get around our community. And we need to have provisions that align with the Americans with Disabilities Act and don't violate it at all, which none of us intend to do at all, to make sure that we keep our community of disabled residents in mind when we are looking at parking minimums and whether we require any parking at all.
And the solution I pose is based, since I left city employment, I primarily build affordable housing at 30% median family income for seniors and people with disabilities. That's most of my work. And what I found is that the lenders will not allow you to have 0 parking. You generally have to have 1 parking space for every 4 beds. So if we get to a place that is generally consistent with that kind of standard, we can address the concerns about people with disabilities not having accessible parking spaces on site, and the balance of it will be preserved by what we already have in our technical codes
Great.
and in federal law.
Thank you so much.
And Mr. Pena?
Mr.
Yes,
Mayor?
get-
I just want to mark that I have some language that we'll get to later that addresses and thank you, Councilmember Poole. I appreciate that, Stuart. I think that the language that I'm going to suggest and talk about later is I don't want to leave that till later. So we'll get to it. I think at this point in time, if we're talking about changes to our parking requirements, we need to address the ADA issues now. So, but we'll get to that later.
If there's nothing inconsistent about that here, then we'll get that when we get to those amendments. And a lot of your amendments I agree with, including the amendment I think that you raised that said even if we don't require any parking, there should be some spaces at ADA. I think there'll be support for that. And when we get to your amendments, we're going to be able to cover that. Mr. Pena goes, and then after him, Hank Smith.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. Gus Pena again, native of East Austin, 2327 East 5th Street. Councilmember Harper Madison, you're right on target. Kathy, Councilmember Tovo, you came on with some good points. Can you hear me?
Yes?
All I can tell you is this. Since Bruce Todd was mayor, I had been supporting transitional housing for homeless people. Affordability has been, a key point in my life, even when Bruce Todd was mayor. Subsequent mayors also, Will Wynn, others also. And right now, Austin is not an affordable town. I mean, you can say it's affordable in some parts, but affordable for whom? People are being driven out of Austin because of the lack of affordability. It's too expensive. They're going to Pflugerville, and if you go south, it's going to be even worse. It's getting worse everywhere. I have not been able to buy. I mean, the VA says I can buy now, but it's been very tough to find a unit with what the VA provides us with. You can now purchase a home with a voucher from the VA. But you know what? Councilmember Harper Madison says it right true. It is difficult for many. It's not even a dream anymore. It's a nightmare for a lot of people. They're in the streets. And I cry. And I tell you, it ain't good for our people. The city, who is on the map to be one of the most precious cities in the United States of America, is not good for the people low socioeconomic status. We can't afford it. And it's going to take all of y'all to come back together and brainstorm to provide a good process. And I know you don't like it, but I'm going to say it again. Councilmember Harper Madison and Kathy Tovo said it appropriately. It ain't our town anymore. It's more expensive. So any kind of plan that you have, please make it real true. And when people say affordable, I say affordable for whom? Give me a definition of affordability, please, that I can give to my veterans, the single female veterans that are homeless with children, not just apartments, something. You know, it's not a dream anymore to own. It's a nightmare. I can't grasp it. It's too far away. That's how a lot of people think about it that way. I'm going to leave it up to y'all because I'm not. Stuart is the expert. I'm not. All I can tell you is what I told Bruce Todd subsequently and others. Lee Leffingwell, Will Wynn. And I'll wrap up and just please make it affordable for everybody. Thank you very much.
Mr. Smith? Hank Smith? What about Ray Collins? Mr. Collins? Well, he's coming down. Ramsey Midwood? Is Ramsey Midwood here? You're going to be up after Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Ray Collins. Today I'm addressing you as the chair of the South Manchac Neighborhood Plan Contact Team. I have a request for a council direction to City Manager Cronk. Sometime in the spring of 2017, after the release of the Code Next Draft 2 text, there was an unfulfilled promise of architectural models of Code Next Draft 2 open house at the Code Next Draft 2 open houses. Assuming that there will be open houses for the Land Development Code reboot, I want to see what a triplex looks like alongside 40 to 60-year-old homes built when 1,100 square feet was considered a family home for 3 to 5 people. I also request modeling for the eastern side of the 4,400 to 5,500 blocks of Manchac Road based on the density-dependent transition zones ranging from 2 to 7 lots deep discussed at last Tuesday's council work session. In the segment of Manchac Road, which is our geographic area, what will be behind the gas station, the small professional office complex, single-family homes, duplexes, condos, apartment complexes, and the restaurant that's present there. From the 4,500 to the 5,200 blocks of Manchac, our drainage infrastructure is water on the road itself flowing into Williamson Creek, where it enters our area in the 5,400 block of Manchac. So last, but far from least, I want to know the impact of corridor development on the ever-expanding Williamson Creek floodplain downstream, particularly in Southwood Districts 2 and 3's portion of the South Manchac Neighborhood Plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Midwood. And as he's coming down, is Sarah Cook here? You'll be up next. You have time donated from Betsy Klubine. Is Betsy here? And what about Lori Wedlick? Okay. So you'll have 7 minutes when you get called up. I think we're at 8 speakers right now. Remember, the first 20 speakers get 3 minutes, and then after that, the speakers get a minute. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. My name is Ramsey Midwood, and I'm the current owner of Sam's Town Point, which is a bar, slaughter in Manchac region, part of Ann Kitchen's deal over there. And I know that there's a tremendous amount of development that's going to go on down in that region. I just wanted to introduce myself and try to become part of that planning area. We got a lot of park deficient areas kind of right around there that I don't know. I kind of have a vision, I guess, of how things could develop there between the Moon Tower and Indian Roller and Sam's Town Point and the new, there's a kind of I wouldn't call it an entertainment district, but it's an emerging entertainment sort of situation, and would love to be able to create, areas where folks can kind of pedestrian traffic and kind of commercial zones, and I'm very unfamiliar with speaking to a council, but and the colonel's here, and I got my partner Scott Mason back there, and you guys want to, you got a minute to help me in this situation. I'd just like to invite everybody down there to kind of take a look and walk around, and perhaps I could kind of illustrate some of the things that we're thinking about down there in the future. Right. And I know that we're not really included in the future plan as I look at the maps, but we would like to be, and there's kind of a plan sort of emerging organically there that I think that if we all work together, we could make it a pretty cool little scene down there, and kind of address affordable housing from the point of creating more wealth for the artistic class and also entrepreneurs that want to come and kind of generate some income so they can afford to be housed.
Thank you. Councilmember Kitchen?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for providing this information. We'd love to talk with you further. I asked my staff to come down if you're going to stay for a few minutes. If not, we'll reach out to you later.
Okay, we'll stay around.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor.
Okay, yes?
Mayor, I have a quick question for you before our next speakers come up, for you and Councilmember Ellis. Something you said made me wonder if I was interpreting a provision on Amendment A incorrectly, and so I think it's helpful to clarify for the public's benefit as well. On page 3, so when you were talking about NCCDs, you talked about changes regarding parking and transition zones and the preservation bonus applying citywide. in provision on page 3 under the code text, talking about provision incentives, preservation incentives, and the ability to construct an additional unit. Is it your intent? How does that sentence read? It says preservation incentives should be expanded everywhere in the urban core, defined as McMansion area, and outside the urban core, but within a quarter-mile walk shed from an activity center, et cetera. So is it your intent that preservation incentives apply citywide or just within a quarter mile? And is that quarter mile consistent in the urban core and outside the urban core? As you were summarizing things, you said that those things would apply citywide. As I read your document, I didn't necessarily see. I got a different impression that some of those were just applying in particular areas of the city.
You are correct. The preservation incentive, which is saying we'll give somebody an additional unit, but only if they maintain the existing home, by way of incenting or helping to preserve homes so that people don't tear them down in order to be able to get an additional unit. When I said applied citywide, I meant the policy is a citywide policy, but you are correct. The citywide policy does not have that preservation bonus available in every place in the city.
Yeah.
So what it says is that it would be expand everywhere in the urban core. It would be everywhere in the urban core, defined as the McMansion. And it would also be outside of the urban core, but only in the places outside the urban core that are within a quarter-mile walk shed of the activity center, activity corridor, transit priority network. And this was done in an effort to add a preservation element. So to the degree that you had an NCCD area that was in one of those defined areas, then this would apply to that NCCD as well.
So, okay, well, it would apply to it because
Are we just jumping around now, or are we just, I thought we were focusing on 5, and then we went into to accept public comments, and now we're all the way down here to question, what is it, 3?
I'm happy to explain why I raised the question, because there was just a comment that these would apply citywide. I mean, we were talking about NCCDs. We have speakers here who are going to talk about NCCDs. I think the extent to which the policies we're discussing are going to apply citywide, and the extent to which the amendments, including this one, that really limit those changes to the urban core and not citywide,
Well,
are
we
relevant.
had an intention of pulling that too, you know.
I'm sorry.
We had an intention of pulling that one.
Okay.
To have a discussion.
But again, because the mayor had
no.
just made a comment, I just wanted to make sure I thought maybe I wasn't reading it correctly, and I just needed to clarify that as we're moving forward.
And it's correct. We have some rules that apply citywide, but that doesn't mean they apply to every parcel within the city. We have rules that apply citywide with respect to how tall SF2 can be, but that doesn't mean that it applies to tracts that are not SF2. So this is a citywide proposal with respect to preservation ordinance, but it doesn't apply to every lot within the city. And it describes which lots that this citywide policy applied to. Let's continue on with the discussion. Ms. Cook, come on up. You have 7 minutes. Is Francis McIntyre here? No? What about Timothy Bray? He'll be up next. You have 7 minutes, Ms. Cook.
If I wasn't feeling nervous before, I certainly am now. My name is Sarah Cook. I'm here to talk about neighborhood conservation and neighborhood plan combining districts. I'm the co-president of the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association. I'm pleased to come speak with you again. I want to first address Councilmember Harper Madison's concerns. I hope that when you come visit with us in June, we'll have more time to talk on these on a personal level. Hyde Park shares the shame that the rest of the city does around the inequitable and racist provisions that were provided. I want to let you know that I think before I had moved to Hyde Park, but a number of our community members worked to get the deed restrictions lifted from every property, even though they're no longer enforceable. We were told that couldn't happen without an act of the legislature, but maybe we can take that up again and work on that together. But I do want to acknowledge the racism that was present when Hyde Park was first platted. And I also want to address a second point that you raised around the rents being higher. I don't believe that that is the case. One of the problems with those rental aggregator sites is that they pull only from apartments that have listed with them. So I think I've seen Rent Cafe cited before as a place where that data is taken from. That doesn't include the smaller accessory dwelling units in the garage apartments that we believe provide a lot more rental opportunities. I think one problem with those units is that they aren't listed on these larger sites, which means they can be less accessible to the public and persons in the know. I don't know if any of you have read Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, but he makes that point, that a lot of rentals and a lot of folks who might most benefit from these affordable rentals don't know how to find them. So that's something else that we can address. But I did want to mention those 2 points, and we're happy to talk more about rents, and I look forward to that. But now, for the first slide, please. I think that you've gotten. Do I advance it? Oh, thank you. So I think you've gotten some of the history. These are a national tool. They're used here in Texas. There are 20 in Dallas, 9 in San Antonio. They're often used to support commercial, like on 11th and 12th Streets, but they're also residential and commercial, as in Hyde Park. We have 2 of them in Hyde Park, as you know. I just want to make a mention about the multifamily housing. There are at least 35 5-plus unit properties, including rental and ownership opportunities in the southern Hyde Park portion. I did a little count of my own in my census on Tuesday, returned 18 multifamily properties with 755 rental units in North Hyde Park. As you heard earlier from CM Tovo, it is one of the densest neighborhoods in Austin. It's about 2.5 times average. NCCDs contain the same type of zoning provisions as any other code. They create cohesive spaces and senses of place. For us, I think this means that we have homes that are in conversation with the street and with one another. We do not allow privacy fences within Hyde Park, and we have fewer homes that are much higher than others, as we've seen in other neighborhoods as they're redeveloped. We believe they protect and encourage density. Again, we've talked a lot about the ADUs and the garage apartments. One interesting feature of the NCCDs in Hyde Park is that they have actually a parking maximum. So while we carried forward the conversations around park, we may want to consider understanding what happened there in that conversation. And then I do want to point out that over 50% of the lots in northern Hyde Park are multi-unit, currently built that way, not just zoned that way. And of course, we're looking forward to affordability unlock applying across the city and in Hyde Park as well. I want to talk a little bit, Councilmember Flanagan, about this downzoning question. I know that you've had some conversation with the chair of the contact team. I think she mentioned that this multifamily zoning was applied in 31 after those single-family homes were built out. You know, it's interesting, there's this tension here between the very built areas of Austin and those parts that are currently being developed and built out now, and I think that this represents some of that. No multifamily structures were downzoned as a result of the NCCD. Some lots with 1 or 2 units, and I'll show you some examples, were moved from MF4 to SF3. Let me show you a couple of reasons why. This was a property that was built in 1908, zoned multifamily in 31, downzoned to SF3 in 2002. As you can see, it's a contributing structure to the LHD. So I think that a lot of neighbors who at the time didn't have the protections of an LHD used the NCCD process to preserve these historic homes that ultimately became contributing structures. Here's another example of a great little cute duplex that's built on Duval Street. This was built in 27, zoned multifamily in 31, rezoned SF3. This is an allowable use under SF3 in 2002. The property changed hands in 2014, a new out-of-state owner, wouldn't you guess, from California. But we wonder if some of the provisions of the NCCD to keep this as SF3 has preserved this market affordable duplex rental that's in the middle of the neighborhood. I want to quickly show you some of the stuff that is buildable under the NCCD. This is 2 new units that have replaced a single family on one lot. This was built, I think, around 2006 after the North Hyde Park. Here you can see in the back there, that's a new integrated duplex that was built from single family, and to its right, you can see that there's a duplex already existing, lots of duplexes, and new duplexes are being added. This is an accessory structure that has 400 square feet of space in it that's replacing a simple 2-car garage. These are 2 new 4plexes that were built with 1929 cottages right in the heart of Hyde Park on Avenue C. We have new missing middle housing. These properties were rezoned from SF3 to multifamily 4 with neighborhood support. We've created 2 new multi-unit neighborhoods. This is an evolving neighborhood, and we're pleased to show that. And as one example, here's a new 4-story, 23-unit building on Guadalupe, and the rest of Guadalupe is zoned for this kind of structure. All of this is possible under the NCCD. Also want to make the point that the NCCDs are amendable. We incorporated state land and worked with developers to add 135 units at Waller Creekside. We've amended it twice within the past 2 years, once to upzone Helping Hands homes to add residential capacity for the children there. Also, we rezoned Baker School. In fact, we zoned it to include a housing opportunity with affordable housing provisions. There are future opportunities to evolve this document to meet the goals of Austin that we all share. This isn't something that is preserved in amber, as one of our steering committee members always warns us against. Don't preserve the neighborhood in amber. Well, we're not. I want to quickly point out that the transit corridors and transition zones will be an important conversation, that the neighborhood was built out before the 60s and the autofocus development that occurred then. Only 5 blocks, that purple line, on one street within the neighborhood, this is both North and South Hyde Park, do not fall into that quarter-mile transition zone. So we want to be thoughtful about that. And in summary, I want to be clear that this isn't about keeping development out of Hyde Park. This isn't about preserving our neighborhood in amber. It's also about not relegating our conversations to Facebook and Twitter. It's about inviting you to come visit with us and see this planned neighborhood. It's about understanding what we've done to create this complete and walkable community, coming to conversation, and watching the principle of zoning become the practice in person. We're excited for the visit that we've scheduled in June, and we invite every single one of you, as we have in the past, to come speak with us, talk with us, and address these issues and see what they look like in Hyde Park. Thank you.
All right. So I was going to talk today about, y'all heard my general spiel before, but I want to talk specifically about why housing in the urban core is important for transit, that not just building in corridors, but building central in corridors. Most of us, we have decisions about choice to use transit or choice to drive for those of us that have that choice. You look at the advantages of each. For driving, it tends to be things like convenient timing, easier point-to-point, and faster per mile for public transit, things like no parking, don't need a car, don't have to drive. And the key point here that I want to talk about is the faster per mile. Some points, it's obviously this is true for all forms of transit, but generally, on the bus, you have to go slower, it makes more stops. So that affects, the equation, and the length you have to go affects the equation. So I used an example here, just some times from Google Maps. At 11:30, obviously during peak times, it's going to be way longer than this. But it's the time it takes driving to get from downtown to go all the way up in 39th, to driving or the bus or biking, then to North Lamar Transit Center, then Palmer Lane and North Lamar. As you can see, the distance between the times becomes a lot more. For example, on the next slide, if you were making the choice whether to take the bus or to take to drive, if you're Guadalupe at 39th, there's like a 4-minute difference. Now you'll look at your equation and say, okay, it might take me 5 to 10 minutes to park downtown. Well, 4 minutes is still going to be faster to park downtown, to take the bus downtown, because the difference between the times, short your transit length time isn't as much. But if you're at North Lamar and Palmer Lane, you're like 25 minutes. And this is, by the way, off-peak again, so probably more like 30 to 40 minutes a regular time. That 5 minutes of parking is a lot less than that 25 minutes. And a similar thing with biking. If you, 6 minutes, not a big difference, especially if you have to consider things like parking. But, almost an hour, yeah, you're probably not as very unlikely to bike. Also want to talk about some of the other advantages of living central. Walking, biking, taking the scooter. I don't have any statistics off the top of my head, but I know biking, after probably 3 or 4 miles, most people are a lot less likely to do it. So in a lot of cases also, when you're commuting, you might have different choices that you want to make. Someday if it's raining outside, you're not going to want to bike as much, but you might take the bus. You might, what I used to do is I would bike in the morning when it was cooler and then take the bus back when it was 100 degrees out at 4 p.m. Another advantage of being more central is if you wanted to use rideshare as one of your modes. Rideshare is a lot cheaper if you're closer in, the shorter distance you have to go. Also, if you're driving, just the shorter distances when you're driving. I think that gets missed a lot in this conversation, that it's not just about getting people out of their cars for living central. It's about when they are driving, if you're 4 miles from your job, that's different than 10 miles. Anyway, that's what I have. So great.
Thank you very much. Is Chris Wojcicki here? Is Kevin McLaughlin here? Okay, so you'll have 5 minutes. Is Austin Talbert here? You'll be on deck. Go ahead, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I have a presentation. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm Kaz Wojtewicz, a D10 resident. Today I'm speaking for myself. We need more housing for more people. We're in the middle of a housing crisis. In Austin for everyone. Put that in your mind today when you're debating amendments. Will this amendment help make an Austin for everyone or not? If the amendment won't help get more housing for new people, for the next generation, for immigrants, for refugees, you should oppose the amendment. Again, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. Look at this map. All the green on the left, that's single-family zoning. And then on the right, that's multifamily zoning. That's the status quo. That's what we're living with right now. Almost 90% of residential zoning in the city of Austin is single-family. This is a City of Austin document, by the way. So I'd like to ask everybody here, where have you lived? Now, with the status quo, think about this. Austin's 55% renters are, and now we have renters on council as well. Who here in the audience is a renter? Who here has lived somewhere that wasn't a single-family detached house? I have. My parents lived in a mobile home in 4 Points when I was born. Since then, I've lived in many different places. I've lived in subsidized housing, a 1940s cabin out in Lake Travis, in another mobile home, in dorms, in barracks, slept without shelter and in the rain on multiple occasions, lived in an apartment, and lived in a single-family house. I'd be okay with any form of housing next to me. Compatibility concerns are grounded in the idea that certain types of homes and a certain type of people are incompatible with single-family housing, with the idea that people in single-family housing shouldn't have to live next to people in apartments. Is strengthening compatibility going to help make an Austin for everyone? I don't think so. On Tuesday, there was concern about people who live in between two corridors. I mean, it sounds great to live in between two corridors, but I don't see why we should be protecting these areas against duplexes, apartments, barbershops, daycares, and the like. Compatibility, in other words, is part of the reason our city is so expensive. Transition zones are part of the reason the city is so expensive. Now let's talk housing capacity. Instead of asking ourselves what should be the housing zoning target, we should be instead asking ourselves, why should we have a housing capacity target in the first place? If the first Austinites had instituted an equivalent set of ordinances, many of us wouldn't be here today. Again, upzoning is costless. If we're going to plan for the future, we need to stop giving in to the impulse to make outsiders pay a premium to live in our great city. We need an Austin for everyone. But also, while we're talking about housing capacity, Jack Craver made some excellent point on his blog today. I'm going to echo them now. Please ask staff to bring back an analysis of the housing capacity. As many housing advocates point out, we need a housing capacity that's 3 to 4 times the total number we want to create. Staff should also provide the calculations they use. If we get 2/3 of new housing outside the core, that's the status quo. It must be rejected. Staff should present several scenarios for the capacity needed to meet the housing goals. And again, it's costless to upzone, and it's much cheaper to provide the much needed public services inside the core than in the suburbs. Missing middle, let's talk missing middle. This is the Boston triple decker. It's missing middle. So is the Chicago 3-flat. So is the 6-unit, 3-story brownstones. This is the missing middle that we've been talking about with Code Next for 5 years plus. And there's no difference between housing scale or neighborhood scale and transit scale missing middle. It's all needed all across the city. Now this is triplexes and fourplexes in 2014. This is where they're at in the city right now. And I had no clue they were all over the city like this. So in conclusion, please make an Austin for everyone. Please support amendments that help us get more housing for more people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes.
If I may, real quick, they're not here yet, but we're about to have some special guests. Girl Scout Troop number 596 from the Walnut Creek Service Unit is about to come and visit us, and I wanted to read a little note from their troop leader real quick. She says, they are all extremely excited to meet their city government. They acted like I told them they were going to meet One Direction. They might be shy and quiet, but please know that this means so very much to them, and they might feel a little intimidated. Thanks again. So just giving you guys a heads up, when they get here, we'll give them a quick acknowledgement. Thank you.
Sounds good. Mr. Talbot, Ron Thrower's on deck. Why don't you come on down? Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. This is my first time. I thought I should bring a gift, so I brought some pictures. This is the map from 1928 and that infamous plan that will legalize segregation in our city. If you look at it, that's also where our 15 most walkable neighborhoods, all but one, are on that map in 1928. This is according to Walk Score. The only one is Brentwood, and it was shortly platted right after it was outside the city limits. So if you talk about the core of our city where we need that is connected, that's walkable, it's already there. The only problem is the last 20 years, those areas have becoming less dense. Here's the census data. The people are having to move further out. Those neighborhoods are filtering up to nicer neighborhoods, right? If you look at our whole city, it's the same in Hyde Park, it's the same in North University. The missing middle is shrinking, right? In 2009, we had 15.1% missing middle. Now we only have 13.3%. This is from the latest ACS, right? Imagine Austin, housing blueprint. It all says we need missing middle. I'm not going to read through all these. It's everywhere. We all agree. You've said it in your work sessions. I'm so thankful, but everyone's in agreement that we want missing middle. Some of you have also expressed that you don't quite understand what it is. But it does fit with our values. So we have to have a code that fits those values, and the zoning has to fit those values. And it has to be simple enough that it can empower small-scale, independent, and local developers, us, to build it, your neighbors to build it. So I want to learn more about missing middle. So last week, I drove down to San Antonio and attended a workshop put on by the Incremental Developers Alliance. This is a nonprofit that was founded and run by practitioners that have been doing this, building naturally affordable missing middle housing for decades. They're in Dallas, they're in Atlanta, they're all over the country. We have a lot of things going for us. We're diverse, we're weird, we're innovative, we're dynamic, we're community-centric. That's my name. I'm also all those things. And we need housing choices that fit all this, right? So it's got to have a variety of sizes. We got to have more lots. Hyde Park has small lots. That's awesome. We need to legalize that everywhere. We need to legalize the things that made Hyde Park, Judges Hill, these neighborhoods we've been talking about today and looking at these amazing things. And Councilmember Tova, I want to thank you for that, what you did on Tuesday, walking through your neighborhood. That's beautiful. We need that everywhere. It's not legal everywhere. We need to re-legalize the things that made those neighborhoods great. This is what it could look like, right? This looks beautiful and amazing, and it's going to provide more housing for more people. And this could be in all of our city. They got to be smaller. We need to get rid of parking minimums. We need to be able to walk and bike and take transit. We need to, most importantly, empower small-scale developers, me, you, your neighbor, your friends. The Incremental Development Alliance wants to help empower people in Austin. I invite you all. I'm going to sponsor a workshop and invite you all to come attend. You're going to learn a lot about it, and I hope you and your staffs will attend.
Thank you. Is Karen McGraw here? You'll be up next after Ron Thrower. You have 3 minutes.
Mayor Pro Tem, council members, Ron Thrower. I want to thank y'all for the efforts that y'all are doing to move things forward. If there's anybody that realizes we need a new code, I think it's myself more than anybody. And for a little bit of relief, I'm not going to be speaking about housing. I'm going to be speaking more about process, and it's not the process that you're going through now. It's the process that I'm going to be faced with in the end. Many of you know that we deal with zoning, subdivision, and site plans for properties all around Austin, so we're in the trenches every day. Not a day goes by that we don't reference the code some 10 to 20 times, and our office is 500 feet away from One Texas Center, where we walk over there anywhere from 5 to 10 times every day. And I'm very concerned because this is all with the 750 page code that we have today with an 11 to 12 point type. And if you look at version 3, it's a 1,500 plus page code with 8 to 9, maybe 10 point type. It's a lot of words. It's very verbose. I have a lot of concerns about what that's going to cost in the end because, jokingly, I have said that the code is going to make me a lot of money. I don't want to make more money. I want you all to make the code as simple as possible so that I can get 30 to 60 projects permitted every year instead of 10 to 15. I think that would be great for Austin. So I want y'all to please concentrate on the simplicity of the code because the Planning Commission even looked at it and they said, please take a third of the words out of the code. We need something that's going to be thinner, something that we can get through a lot easier so we can get projects done a lot faster. And again, I don't want to make as much money as I'm making right now. Help me make not as much money as I have right now coming in. That would be great. I know, Mr. Flanagan, it sounds odd. I think I'm the only developing consultant that's saying this, but it's true. And I'll also point out, and I'm very appreciative, and I'm not trying to call you out on this, but I'm going to take credit for about 10 years ago, I had a case where I was at this very podium, and I said density is a community benefit. It is very much a relief to hear it coming from the other side of the podium for a change. Thank you.
Mayor.
Yes.
I think I said housing is a community benefit, just to be clear.
Is Gerald Balaka here? No? What about Deborah Fimat? You'll be up here. Mr. Graw, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Mayor, council members. I'm Carrie McGraw. I'm an architect. I've been here a long time. I've lived in Hyde Park over 40 years. If you don't know me, I chaired all the neighborhood planning work for that. I've been in many, many neighborhood meetings. I find our citizens in Austin to be creative and hardworking and willing to help you figure out how to densify our city without destroying their neighborhoods. And I hope that we all have respect for that and for those people being involved in this process. I'm a little concerned that we're bringing this thing back. We've got to really hurry, and we may be cutting some of that out. But what I really want us to do is to see what we can do to maintain that greatest place to live in the country and not damage it as we go forward. My main concern today, and I could talk to you about many things, but I'm going to talk to you about neighborhoods. Because when you brought Draft 3 back, Draft 3, all of Code Next took out neighborhood planning as a program and took out NCCDs as a program. That means there are no neighborhood planning programs in the code. And that means you have no tools. And I really think that's a big mistake. I don't know what to tell you to do about it. I think if you keep the programs we have, that's a start. I think instead of tossing them, the better thing to do is say, how do we improve these programs? One thing you need to keep in mind, and Mayor Pro Tem mentioned this the other day, why are there NCCDs in some areas and not in other areas of the city? Well, I will tell you why. Because that tool came into the code in 1985. The city did one NCCD in Fairview, said they were going to do more, but they dropped the program. So an NCCD is a very tedious process of conservation of a neighborhood, but it all has to be done by the neighbors. So it's either done by experienced volunteers or paid consultants, because the city does not offer conservation or preservation to neighborhoods. The city staff will not do those things. So if you want to help neighborhoods, you really need to get serious about what tools you have and what tools your city offers. Because when these are gone, the city will offer no help to neighborhoods at all. So I hope you will keep that in mind. The neighborhood planning process that's 20 years old is an infill process. That's all it is. It's intended to infill the city. It's not even intended to address conservation or preservation. So you don't have a program to help neighborhoods with those things. And I think that's a real shame. I also want to mention when you talk about, well, we're going to keep NCCDs, but we're going to change all these things. I just want to say that they are overlays to the current code. That's not as simple as it sounds. And because they were done with tremendous stakeholder participation, notification, and everything, that I think we need that same process for their amendments.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Deborah, Matt, come on up. Is Sharon Blythe here? Why don't you come on down?
My name is Deborah Fimat. I'm an architect, been an architect for 40 years. I live in Allendale. I'm sort of in the same situation as she was. I'm here to discuss keeping diverse neighborhoods, particularly those that have natural resources that need to be maintained. For example, along Shoal Creek Boulevard and near the Shoal Creek area, which is where Allendale is, we have really old, big trees that if development is allowed to come in and build greater areas, those trees will go. Those trees provide shade, they take away carbon dioxide from our air, and they give an amenity that is equal to reducing traffic or to getting more cars off of roads. So I would like to see something like an NCCD or something to allow for various neighborhoods that have these areas of greenery to be maintained, to keep the environmental success that they bring, rather than building greater areas. My other greatest concern is flooding. We have expansive clays in Austin. Expansive clays don't absorb much water after we get a little bit of rain. We all know that. And therefore, they start acting like concrete. If you start it's not difficult. If you put more impervious area on a site, the amount of water that was being absorbed by the ground before will be less. That's it. So if we start doing these developments with more impervious coverage, you're going to have to go to subsurface drainage to make it work. Developers generally don't include that. Simple residential developers don't include that in their pricing. And I don't know if the city has subsurface drainage system to take it over, which brings up, so really, to keep water on your site as the law requires and to prevent it from being drained onto the street, you have to get it off some way, and the soil is not going to absorb it. So it has to come off in subsurface drainage. Developers don't do it. This morning I was walking down the street, and a developer who just bulldozed a single-family house where young students are living 4 at a time to be able to afford living in Austin. So don't forget, single-family houses have 4 people in them, which sometimes requires more cars because they have to go to different jobs. In my own house, my sister lives with me, my son lives with me in a single-family residence. So single-family residents are not all bad, okay? And they could house multiple people. Anyway, if the developers, back to developers, they come in and they cut the trees to fit their buildings.
You finish your thought.
Saying they'll live. They don't. So we have to protect the trees. We have to enforce our heritage tree policy, and developers should pay for the infrastructure that is required.
Thank you very much.
For subsurface drainage.
Thank you. Ms. Blythe, you want to come up? You're our last 3-minute speaker. Is Carlotta Garcia here? I'm sorry, what's your name, sir? Jarabalaca. I'll give you both 3 minutes. Go ahead.
My name is Sharon Blythe, and I live in District 6. I want to thank this council for your proposing this plan, because it is going to make me an extremely wealthy woman. It's going to make my property extremely wealthy to be able to subdivide it, put duplexes, triplexes, high-rises in it, and it'll make me an extremely wealthy person. So just think about what you're doing. You're making people that already have means more wealthy because of this code. You're not helping anything that you think you're helping. And I would appreciate it also if we would get some information out to District 6 of really what's going on at City Hall, because most of the residents out there don't have a clue. So again, I want to thank y'all for making me a very wealthy person. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Balaca is, and then Carlota Garcia will be next. Is Enrique Sands here? I know, I'm just making sure that you're here. Is Michael Floyd here? Okay, so you'll have 3 minutes when you get called up.
Okay, my name is Gerald Balaka. I live in District 10, and thank you for allowing me to speak.
Can you pull the microphone toward you?
Okay, I'm concerned because I'm not hearing a lot about preventing excessive storm runoff during this process. There wasn't a lot of talk about it during Code Next. There's not a lot of talk about it now. And the reason I'm here is I'd like to show you an example of what was created because of poor planning by the city. This is the block I live on. Originally, it was platted with an alley, and you can see down the middle, that's where the original alley was, and there's proof that it existed. And eventually, the city took away that alley. But what they probably didn't realize was that they took away the ability for about half of this block to be able to drain. So now all of the water flows through the adjoining properties. This all happens because 35th Street reaches a high point, and then it actually goes down as a hill all the way to Shoal Creek. And so the water needs a place to go, and it's been blocked since the alley was taken away. And so now it goes through the neighborhood. And my driveway turns into a major river. Like when I first moved in, I had this idea of putting down crushed, decomposed granite, and I did. And it all ended up in Shoal Creek because I get so much water flowing through my property. And it's all because they took away this alleyway and they didn't really plan it properly. So all I'm really asking is that you take into consideration local issues like this during this process and not just look at a map and say, okay, we'll put this zoning here, but there's information like this that's useful, and we have to take into consideration what's happening in individual areas. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's my driveway after a storm. But during the storm, it's a river.
Thank you. Is Richard Ribb here? Mr. Ribb? And then is Isabel Guerrero here? And is Trenton Henderson? Okay. You'll have 3 minutes after Ms. Garcia is done.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Carlota Garcia, and I'm here with Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church and Austin and Central Texas Interfaith. Our organization is expanding from 5 to 10 counties this year with the intent of doubling our leadership base to ensure that Central Texas is hospitable and supportive of all types of families, as we're discussing today, including from middle and lower income backgrounds and people experiencing homelessness. We've also, for your information, we've been spending considerable time at the Capitol fighting for local control and pushing back against the proposed tax caps. So we know from our conversations at our institutions that affordability is a key issue affecting our people. Our organization is conducting research around policies impacting homelessness and implementation of the Affordable Housing Bond, which we supported expanding to $250 million last year. We're also looking at tools that are articulated in the UT study on gentrification, Uprooted, and exploring those options for our folks. Our intent is to continue to educate and engage our constituency around opportunities to expand affordability in Austin. So last year, our organization raised a number of concerns around revisions to the land use code, and these are concerns that we think are still relevant today. We recognize that any land use code will not entirely solve the affordability problems. However, we believe that our code should be guided by 2 basic principles. The first is on displacement. Displacement due to skyrocketing land values, housing costs, rents, and taxes should be minimized. Recognizing the historic injustice of previous land use practices that discriminated against whole segments of a community, including many from our congregations, recognizing that we've got to take a lot of care in preventing further discrimination and displacement. Second, for Austin to have an inclusive and diverse population and be welcoming to both old and new residents, there must be a wide range of affordable housing options based on the preservation of existing affordable housing stock, encouragement of such alternatives as mobile home parks, and incentivizing new construction for the full spectrum of incomes. Last month, we were pleased to see broad support from you all for the expansion of the density bonus program, the downtown density bonus, to promote affordable housing construction across the city. and include multi-bedroom units targeted at those making below 60% of MFI or even as low as 30%. We hope that this expanded density bonus program will be implemented as designed. We do have some concerns about the conversation at hand, and so my colleague, Dr. Ribb, will speak to those.
Good afternoon. Hope everybody's eating their Wheaties because y'all are on for a long slog with what you're starting here in public today. Thanks for doing it. My name is Dr. Richard Ribb. I'm from All Saints Episcopal Church, and I also am with Austin Central Texas Interfaith. We are concerned. We're concerned that proposals to increase space density entitlements and others could undermine the incentive for developers to participate in the proposed density bonus program. Because of state restrictions, density bonuses may be the best way to directly incentivize the construction of affordable housing units. Entitlements in residential zoning categories above and beyond those provided in the present land use code should not be granted by right, but should be calibrated to incentivize the construction of affordable units in all parts of the city. Furthermore, something more or less equivalent to the present SF3 zoning category excuse me, should be retained, and compatibility should be defined or redefined in terms that allow neighborhoods to limit undesirable uses, particularly those such as bars and nightclubs in clusters. Similarly, we must ensure that changes to transition areas around our corridors do not exacerbate displacement pressures on communities that have already undergone dramatic and rapid change. New development along transit corridors in Central East Austin has already contributed to the displacement of African Americans and Latinx communities, families, and are further disrupting community traditions and congregational life. We hope that you will take our concerns into consideration as you deliberate on guiding principles moving forward. Increasing the affordable housing bond to $250 million and working to have it pass have led to an historic opportunity to address critical housing issues. We ask that you not lock yourself into a narrow path today. Your work today will have considerable influence on the bond's effectiveness and this once-in-a-generation opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Jay Crosley? Is Beth Avon here? Why don't you come on down? You'll be at the other podium. You have 1 minute, Mr. Crosley.
1 minute?
1 minute.
All right, thank you. Hi, my name is Jay Blazer Crossley. I live in D7 in a traditional 700 square foot duplex with my wife and 4-year-old son. I guess with 1 minute, I have to just talk about what equitable, sustainable growth would mean. And our region adds about 50,000 people a year. That's about 2.5% growth every year. So just planning for 10 years, every single neighborhood in our region, every place we have human habitat today, should add housing for 25% more. And if you asked your staff to develop a map that had zoning capacity of 3 to 4 times, 25% more for every single neighborhood, that would be the equitable map. And that would be the sustainable map as well if you didn't include Greenfield. And so that is the baseline for all these discussions of what would be equitable and sustainable, and we should go from there. All parking requirements are dangerous. Please stop. And especially on small little streets where parked cars make them safer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is Ludovine Varga here? Why don't you come on down to this podium? You have 1 minute.
Hello, Council. Thank you for hearing our thoughts today. My name is Beth Aving, and I live in District 5, and I've come to speak about housing cooperatives as they are an incredibly efficient and enriching affordable housing solution. I personally lived in co-ops for 8 years, and not just as my time as a student. There are at least 22 co-ops in Austin serving hundreds of Austinites, and many have been around since the 70s. To give you a sense of how they're run, residents make decisions through democratic voting, they pool resources, and they operate at cost. They also have committees that hone skills such as accounting, maintenance, and community outreach. Upon comparing the rent of Austin co-ops with neighboring properties, we have seen that they cost 40 to 60% of market rates. My sister lives in a co-op in the Bolden Creek area, one of the most expensive areas to live in Austin, and her rent, utilities, and all of her food combined cost $700 a month. It's a beautiful and well-kept house with 8 residents ranging from age 28 to 55. I believe that co-ops could be a great solution for Austin for all of these reasons, but we need to ensure that density is allowed in areas that won't just be bought up by wealthy developers, and allow for these more democratic and resident-led solutions. Thank you.
Is Francis Acuna here? Yes.
Mayor, I just wanted to make a comment to our last speaker.
Okay.
Thank you for your advocacy for cooperatives. Later on today, I don't know if you'll be here for this or not, but one of the amendments that I'm bringing forward will be to include cooperatives as one of the missing middle housing types in the list of permitted missing middle structures. So I just wanted to let you know in case you're not going to be here later on. Okay?
Thank you.
And hopefully it'll pass.
Is Francis
Thanks.
Acuna? Francis Acuna here? You'll be up on this podium. Go ahead, you have a minute, 1 minute.
Hello, City Council, Mayor. My name is Ludovine, and my request is simple. Austin needs more housing. We need more housing so that my children, my grandchildren, will have a place to live here in Austin. We need more housing because it helps with affordability, density, and diversity. So let's just make it easier to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Sara Tabrizi here? Go ahead, you have 1 minute, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Francis Acuna. I'm a resident from Dove Springs. And as you may know already, we have been risking our homes with a previous cover and the mapping of the missing middle, I encourage you to engage the community in all of these decisions that you're about to recommend. Demolition of homes that, we have worked so hard in our community. It's, this is our home. We bought it, and we think of growing our kids in there. And if all of these recommendations, building fourplexes and everything that you guys are going to recommend, that is not a fair thing, because we are, we have a voice.
Thank you very much. Ms. Nahas, you are our last speaker at 1 minute.
Oh, I'm sorry to Rizzi.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. First of all, thank you so much to everyone for your hard work. I know you stay long hours, so thank you for everything you do. I am testifying neutral because I haven't had a chance to read through everything, but I do want to make an impassioned plea that we really need more housing, and it can't all be in East Austin. I grew up in Austin, in Northwest Austin, and I've seen the city change, and a lot of the diversity has left the city, unfortunately. I don't believe that it's as sustainable as it used to be. A lot of my friends can barely afford to live here. I'm lucky enough to live in this city, but I worry for a lot of my friends that are just barely making their rent. So I trust you all to do the right thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
While Ms. Acuna is still here, I wanted to comment briefly on, I guess, our responsibility as council members and leaders of this city. And much of the reason why Ms. Acuna came down to City Hall today after calling my office this morning was because of an email that was sent out that alarmed much of my district, because one could read that email and be worried that we were about to pass things today that was going to create great flooding and great density and do all these bad things that people in District 2 really are rightfully afraid of. District 2 has faced horrific flooding, where family members were lost, where homes were lost, where the city has had to invest significantly in buyouts to make it right what was done. I've sat down with Ms. Francis and we've cried together over the things that have happened in District 2. And I just want all of us on this dais to be aware of the impact of the things that we put out there, whether it be through your email list, whether it be however you decide to put information out there. Please be aware of the impact and the fear that can be created by things that are said by leaders of our city. And so I understand we all have the prerogative to say what we will and to address our constituents, as we should. That's all our prerogative. But I just hope, I was really hoping this didn't become as divisive as it has so quickly. I've had a chance to significantly cool off from seeing that email this morning and hearing from very fearful constituents. And I want my constituents to know we are not making decisions today that will create flooding. In fact, the base motion right now includes a line that says the revised code text and map should result in reduced citywide impervious cover and improve citywide water quality. I intend to support that, and I'm pretty sure there's more than 6 on this dais that will support that. So, excuse me, I have some allergy stuff going on. So I just want it clear to those watching who couldn't come down from District 2. We are not making decisions that will affect, this is guidance to staff to bring back a draft, and there'll be plenty of time to comment going forward. There's time to comment, and there's time for us to make it right and make it a code for all of Austin.
Thank you. Councilmember Harper Madison, do you want to introduce Girl Scout Troop 596?
I do. So welcome, Girl Scout Troop, Brownie Troop 596. We'd like to say welcome to you and your leaders and your co-leaders and volunteers this afternoon. Did you guys get to take your tour yet? Oh, so I understand that you're going to get one of the most fantastic tours of City Hall, and I hope you really, really enjoy it. My colleagues and I are so happy to have you join us today, and we look forward to you guys letting us know how your tour went. Thank you for coming.
All right, hi. Good to have you guys with us. I think there actually is one more speaker. Is Michael here? Nahas? Come on down. You have a minute.
I'm sorry, I haven't seen anybody do this. Is it this one? Or?
Yeah, that's good.
Hi, my name's Michael Nahas. I'm an economist. I worked as Julie Oliver's advisor, so some of you may have known her running for Texas 25. She hopes to run, or she is running again. And I've seen a few of you out on the campaign trail. So I'm an economist. I've worked at UT. I've worked here downtown. I live on a street that's less than 1.5 miles from the university, less than 2 miles from the Capitol building, less than 3 miles from where I'm standing right here. And it's a street with single-story buildings. Yeah, that's just inconceivable for me. Like, if there is so much demand to be in Austin, why are these houses small? They're single-story. They should be fitting multiple families. They should be allowed to do 3plexes or 4plexes. A huge amount of this city is spending a huge amount of their income on rent. And by increasing the supply, we will lower the amount of money they spend on rent and give them more money to spend on food, for going out to restaurants, to keeping the businesses running here in Austin. The Economist, the magazine, recently published an article. I can get the name for it here. But they talked about it's sorry we're full city politics. They mentioned that San Francisco, over the last 3 decades, has created fewer than 2,000 new homes per year. And we know about supply and demand. That's the basic thing from economics. There's no new supply in San Francisco, and the demand is going up, so the price goes up. And without supply here in Austin, that's going to keep being the same, and it's going to have large environmental side effects because people are not living close to where they work. They're driving farther, which means more pollution.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think those are all the speakers that we have. Mr. Kassar?
Now that we're done with speakers, I was just coming in off the dais and had wanted to second the Mayor Pro Tem's comments. But then we, of course, introduced the Girl Scouts and Brownies, so thank you guys for coming. But I just also wanted to mention that during work session, I think things sometimes got a little bit testy or difficult, and that as we head into this difficult amendment process and looking at all these pieces of paper, I think we need to have, and I'll commit myself to as much patience with each other as we can as we go through this important document, and refrain from the kind of hyperbole that the Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, because I think we all have our motive of trying to help people and take care of folks, and we don't want to spread any fear or misinformation. And so I really appreciate your leadership and your comments, Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay. So I think that the issue in front of us right now is whether or not we want to continue NCCDs, and if we want to continue NCCDs, we're going to continue them with an overlay. And I would propose that we take a vote first on that first question and a vote on the second question.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, say it again.
That the first question, I think, is do we want to continue and preserve NCCDs? And if we do we want to impose the overlay on top of them or not? I think those are the two questions. And am I mischaracterizing that, Mr. Flanagan?
I think a little bit.
So help me characterize it.
Right. So in the amendment language that I provided, I don't say to remove them end of sentence. I say that they should be reevaluated in the context and allow staff to come back and say these are the parts of it that work and that are great and that address, no fences in the front yard, as we saw a speaker say, not just a blanket removal. So I don't think that's what anyone is proposing.
Would you be okay with something that said at this point, by way of direction, that we're keeping them in, that we put the overlays on, but we ask staff to come back with any other thoughts they would have with respect to NCCDs, to take a look at those and take it further than that if they wanted to, or come back and talk to us about better ideas they might have or additional ideas they might have with NCCDs?
I mean, I think that's ultimately what we're saying, or what I'm saying, just to speak for myself, which is the NCCDs that exist might be fine, but I want staff to come back and tell me that these are the parts of them that work and these are the parts that don't work, and I don't want to lose the part that I think mostly what your language says, which is we want the general planning principles across the city to apply.
And I certainly want that too.
Yeah.
I would like to give them some direction. So again, there's like an expectation in the community so that if they come back with that, if they come back and preserve NCCDs, they know that there was at least a critical mass to do that at this point, that if they did that, we actually wanted them to apply the overlays on top of that and not just the NCCDs and not cover them with the overlays. But asking them also to take a look at NCCDs, I would support as well, and certainly apply overall planning tools. I don't know if that works. Councilmember Kitchen.
I'm thinking that at this point in time, I wouldn't want to go as far as you suggested, because I think what is important is to get the information back. So I think the wording that Councilmember Flanagan has used and Councilmember Harper-Madison and Renteria, if you just stop before the last sentence and add a different sentence there, you can get it. Because they do talk in terms of reevaluating NCCDs, and then you could add language about, and he talks in terms of identifying what's beneficial. You could take out the last sentence that says unique zoning districts should be mapped and replace that sentence with what Councilmember Flanagan just said, in terms of, and I don't remember how you said it, in terms of the staff providing information back to inform the council. I would prefer to have that information before I made any kind of directive, and I think that the language you have, Mayor, is too much of a directive.
Okay, so let's get a vote on that. I'm fine in putting in language either before or after the vote. If the vote for the Amendment A language continues, to include the language that says we're asking staff to evaluate unique zoning districts, NCCDs, in the current context of Austin's housing and transportation needs. I would support that language. But I do want to vote on the language that says we're going to preserve NCCDs, and I want to vote on whether or not we're going to apply those elements, those overlays to it.
Those are two separate votes, right?
Two separate votes. You ready to take a vote on those? So the first question is whether we're going to continue, whether we're specifically going to state that at this point, at the end of this, I'm going to suggest that we include the language that says that staff is asked to evaluate NCCDs in the current context of Austin's housing and transportation needs, because I would like that analysis. All right, but first, I want to take a vote on whether or not we're going to preserve and continue NCCDs, and then whether we're going to put those overlays on top of it.
Mayor?
Yes.
I'd like to vote on putting the overlays on top first, because if that passes, I will vote to keep the NCCDs.
Okay, so let's first amend it that way. The question is, if we're going to continue NCCDs, do we want those overlays to apply?
I would like to change that a little bit, because Councilmember Cassar asked for that to be first. I'd rather ask the other to be first. And the reason is because I would characterize it as as putting the overlays over to the extent that evaluation comes back to us. We decide based on that evaluation that that's the best way forward.
Well, it sounds like they'll both pass, so we can vote whichever order.
Do what?
If it sounds like then they'll both pass, so we should just put them in whatever order. Your order is fine. I imagine they'll both.
Well, but I think what Amber's saying is she doesn't want to put the overlay on it.
I don't want to put the overlay on in the absence of information. We have zero information about the impact.
Okay. So let's take that vote. Do we want to put the overlays on top of the NCCDs? If we
were going to take it the other way.
Okay. We can take a vote on the order that I take the vote on.
Yeah.
No, I'm calling it in the order of the meaning of the sentence in the way that I think will move us forward on the substance of the issue. So the first question I'm going to call is, if we do NCCDs, do we want the overlay on top of it? Those in favor of that, please raise your hand. It is
I'm going to abstain.
Flanagan, Ellis, Cassar, Renteria, me, and Garza. So that's included. The next question is, do we then want to include do we want to include preserving NCCDs with the overlay? Let's take a vote on that. Those in favor, please raise your hand. First, the first vote was whether we brought the amendment on, whether we included the overlay. Now we're taking whether we're preserving the NCCDs and putting in the overlay. Those in favor, please raise your hand. And it is everyone on the dais except for Councilmember Natasha.
Nope.
Natasha Masson. What?
I voted no on the second.
I'm sorry?
I voted no.
Okay. Ms. Flanagan voted no. Okay. That amendment makes it in. I also want to now put in the language that says that staff is asked to evaluate NCDs in the current context of Austin's housing and transportation needs. Is there any objection to that being included?
What is the language exactly?
Staff
is it this language that's here in front of us?
Unique zoning districts should be reevaluated in the current context of Austin's housing and transportation needs. That language. Is there any objection?
And the rest of the sentence, right? The whole sentence.
And any tools that are beneficial to said needs. Well, I'm not going to say should be codified. So no, only the first part of that sentence. Unique zoning districts should be, NCDs should be reevaluated in the current context of Austin's housing and transportation needs. Is there any objection to including that language? Hearing none, that language is included. Still on NCCDs or these zoning districts, does anyone have any additional amendments they want to propose? Yes, Councilor Tovo.
Yeah, I'm doing this language on the fly, so I'm not sure that it will be fully as articulated as it would be otherwise. I think as the staff are doing that evaluation in the current context of Austin's housing and transportation needs, in addition to analyzing the extent to which NCCDs currently contain missing middle housing.
Say that one more time, I'm sorry.
I don't know that I can do that. I wrote a report to repeat that back.
I wrote it.
Did you? Thank you, Ann.
Would you read it?
Councilmember Kitchen.
In addition to analyzing the extent to which NCCDs currently contain missing middle housing.
Thank you.
Staff's also asked to evaluate that. Is there anybody object to having them take a look at that? Hearing none, that is also included. Okay. The next topic area that's raised by this, after NCCDs, are common COs. There's language there in B. Does anybody have any objection to that language being included? Councilmember Flanagan.
So the unique COs, the first half is fine. Generally incorporated into zoning classifications, not carried forward. The last part, unique COs carried forward. The challenge is that there are a lot of those, and my hope is that based on other items that are in the guidance document here, specifically somewhere later where we talk about use restrictions, which is some of the more commonly wild and crazy COs, that we can address use restrictions in a way that reflects what those COs say, even if they are unique. So it's not just common COs. Maybe the way to do this, Mayor, is to say COs that are generally incorporated into the new code are not to be carried forward.
I think that's fine. I mean, common, I don't think really has a meaning in that sentence.
And to say not just zoning classifications, but in other ways we might address those COs in the code.
COs that are generally incorporated into the new code are not to be carried forward.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm fine with that change. Anybody have an objection to that? Yes, Councilmember Tovo.
No, I don't have an objection to that, but I don't understand the sentence edited or not edited.
I'm sorry?
They just took out zoning.
Yeah, I just have a question about what your intent is with this.
My intent was that if it's carried forward otherwise, without the need for the CO, because it's been incorporated into a zoning classification or otherwise in the code, then it's not necessary to carry it forward. But to the degree that it's unique and not otherwise carried forward,
then it would be carried forward. Thanks for that clarification.
Does anybody have any objection to that? Hearing none, that change is made. The next amendment is down in question 2. Yes,
Mr. Mayor? So I have a suggestion, and I know we talked about this before, but to my mind, going through number 1 and deciding what we were keeping and then having a long conversation and getting into the details and then going back to your amendment, I would rather just get number 1 done.
and I hear that, and I don't think that's the best way for us to go, because when we're done with this, we're now going to go back to the amendments and see what amendments we can just agree to. We're going to go back to the exercise we started doing before. I think that's going to clear up the amendments. And when we amend something, and this is the amendment that's been offered, just because there's an amendment in Section 1 doesn't mean that Section 1 is necessarily open. We have an amendment on the table, and someone can then amend that amendment. I can be overruled by the dais if the dais wants to do it differently. But I would continue through this amendment, raising the issues that are raised in this amendment, and then I would go back to look at all the amendments and see what we can agree to and not, and that'll narrow down the issues.
If I could explain,
Okay.
I'm happy to go. I don't have a problem with going through it like we started out to identify what we wanted to keep and what we needed more conversation about. It's the back and forth that's causing me some concern. The back and forth between identifying what we agree to and the areas that we need more conversation about. Because as we get further along into our questions, I know there's going to be a number of questions where we really have to dig into it. And if we start digging into it there and we haven't finished with one or two, which really relate to the later ones, it's just going to be harder to do. So I would just like to do it one way or the other. I'm happy to just go through and figure out what we all agree to and put in a parking lot the stuff that needs more conversation.
We tried that a second ago. It didn't work. So we're going to try this process. And they're distinct questions. The next question we have is, it says, do we want to go to increase the housing capacity to 3 times the blueprint? 3 times is the number in the amendment. Does anyone want to move to change that, or is that okay? Councilmember Flanagan.
I'm satisfied with 3 as long as we add the phrase at a minimum 3 or at least 3, whichever version people prefer.
Does anybody have a problem to saying at least 3 times? Hearing, yes, Councilmember Alter.
I don't agree with this method as a useful part of this, but I know I don't have the votes, but I don't want to be recorded as agreeing with that, but I'm not going to stop everyone else from moving forward with
So
that.
noted.
Mayor?
And I haven't heard any objection to saying at least 3 times. Yes, Councilmember Poole.
I wanted to understand why the 2 to 3, why the 2 was removed.
Because some people wanted 2 to 3 and some people wanted 3 to 4, and it looked like the thing that would get the best votes and carry the sentiment that was the overlap of where people were was to say 3. That's why. Councilor Tovo.
I think regardless of whether we say 2 times or 3 times or some other number, I hope that we'll proceed along this process with some understanding based on the pretty extensive information that's been provided in the past by our planning department of what the existing capacity is and the existing rate of housing construction, so that we are not going in and making decisions based on a real, what one of our city staffers called an intoxication with the numbers. I mean, I think that we need to ground our land use decisions in some of the existing information we have, including the capacity studies that have been done, and they're mapped by district, they're not mapped by district, but they're mapped by neighborhood areas throughout, and so I think it's a source of very useful information.
And I agree with that. And I think one of the neat things about what we're doing here is not deciding anything. We're just asking staff to go and give us a code. And as part of that, they're also going to be asked to tell us what the numbers are and what the yield is associated with that. And when they come back to us, we're going to see whether they hit the mark or they don't hit the mark, and whether we want to give additional or different instructions, as will the community, because they'll be given a chance to do that too. We're not deciding anything here today. We're just giving direction. So I agree, Councilmember Tovo, with what you said. Does anybody have any objection to saying at least 3? Hearing none, that's going to continue that way. The next section talks about.
Mayor?
Yes?
I just want to be certain that you're not moving on from number 1 when you say the next section. You're not moving on to number.
I am in question number 2. We just did 2A.
In which case.
But
I'm sorry, objective number 1.
We're still in objective.
Okay.
A. But objective one also has a B. And this is the concept of where are we adding additional entitlements. And this amendment says we're only going to add additional entitlements to increase the supply of missing middle housing or through a density bonus that requires some measure of affordable housing. So in a non-missing middle context, it requires the density bonus. That's the amendment in front of us. Council member Madison Harper.
Actually, Councilmember Kitchen had her hand up before I did.
Okay.
The language that I have that I want to make a change to, yes, I want to pull this for discussion, and it's B, the first little I. Shall I go ahead and say
Where are you? What's the amendment to that you want to offer?
That's right.
Where is it?
It's where it says to increase the supply of missing middle housing.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to insert, let's see, small scale missing middle. So just the term small scale.
Okay.
And I'd be happy to explain that.
Let's see if there's a second for it first. Councilmember Kitchen suggests that we should add the phrase small scale. It is seconded by Councilmember Tovo. Councilmember Kitchen, do you want to explain it?
Yes. Oh, this is just this builds off of our conversation that we had at work session, and it acknowledges that the smaller scale missing middle housing, it doesn't work to attach those to affordable, to density bonus programs, but at some level, missing middle housing is appropriate to attach affordable housing to. And so we had a long conversation about the wide range of size we were talking about with missing middle. So that's why I'm proposing small scale. I'll leave it to our staff to let us know where that break point is. They had some suggestions at the work session, but I don't think we should tie to any particular number at this point. I think we should say small scale, and then our staff will be able to provide us information about what that is.
Let me see if I understand it, if I could. So it's with respect to missing middle housing. So there'd be some missing middle housing that we would be adding that obviously would not have a density bonus attached to it.
Right.
But what you're saying is that anything above a small scale missing middle housing by the categories we have would have a bonus density tied to it.
Yes, I don't see any reason to treat those differently, because what we have said is that our goal is to secure affordable housing, so we're not leaving anyone behind, so we want to, wherever it pencils out, we want to be sure that we are tying entitlements to affordable housing. So to my mind, there is no reason to leave out the larger missing middle housing from that requirement for affordable housing. And so we need to distinguish between the size of housing.
Okay, Mr. Flanagan?
So I'm generally in agreement there. Would you accept smaller scale instead of small scale?
Yeah, that's fine.
That would help me. Thank you.
And if I may, Mayor, both
Yes.
Councilmember Kitchen and Flanagan touched on what my concern was, but I wonder if you guys would be comfortable with us just removing the words missing middle and just using smaller scale, to where the sentence would read, to increase the supply of smaller scale housing. Because as you pointed out,
Sure.
part of the confusion is the term missing middle.
That's fine.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I'm just concerned that someone would read that to be the smaller scale housing, which is smaller than missing middle.
Yeah.
Right now we have small scale housing and we have big scale housing, and
So
missing
smaller
middle
scale, missing middle.
would be, missing middle tells us it's something that's in the middle. Mr. Kassar?
I think the challenge is I don't want to be calibrating the affordable housing bonuses on the fly here. I would want every time that it works for it to be applied, and when it doesn't work, for it to not be applied. And right now I think that the existing language hits that because we have a 60,000.
Go ahead, finish.
I'm
and then I'll
going to
explain.
explain why it is that I think that.
Okay.
I think that because we want to create missing middle housing, we want to create density bonuses that require some measure of affordable housing. We have a 60,000 unit goal that this code will never get us to on its own. And so, of course, the staff, I think very clearly in many places in this document, is being directed to create as much affordable housing as we can while also creating missing middle housing. That's throughout this document. And so I don't want to be calibrating the density bonus on the fly, guessing right now whether it's 3 units or 4 units or 6 units where the affordable housing requirements start locking in. That may not be what is intended here, but if we can have language into this that makes it very clear that we want the bonuses calibrated appropriately to create missing middle and to create missing middle with bonuses, I think that's what we all want. And so my concern is if we say smaller missing middle needs a density bonus, it's not clear whether we're saying smaller missing middle needs a density bonus on top, whether smaller missing middle or bigger missing middle needs a density bonus in the middle of it. That's why I don't want to be crafting density bonuses on the dais, since we have consultants to try to help us do that. Well, I think we actually have the same goal.
I think Councilmember Flanagan may have been first, but I have.
Mr. Flanagan?
Okay, well then he's saying.
Waved it off to you.
Yeah, so Councilmember Kassar, that would be fine, except this, if you wanted to suggest some language that said what you just said, because right now we're not, the way the language is written, that's in Mayor Adler and Councilmember Ellis's, does not connect the affordable housing to any of the missing middle. So I think that the way you explained it is what I intended. I just used shorter words for it, but we could have a whole sentence if you wanted to use that.
As I write the sentence, can we go to the next amendment and I'll do my best to write it?
Well,
Okay.
I'd rather finish this right now.
I know you would, but I just, but I don't want to make up the sentence on the fly. If you give me, I want to make up the sentence on the fly, just with a little bit more time.
Yes, why don't you start writing? Yes, Councilmember Tovo.
Yeah, so I know I had some amendments to this section that may be in sync with the conversation we're having, and I thought, Councilmember Alter, you had one as well to this section, and so I don't know if I'm remembering that correctly or not. And I'm happy to. I think generally.
I'm trying to figure out what the issue is here. What's at issue? What's different about these? What's the question? I mean, are we all agreed that we want entitlement to create additional missing middle housing, and that we also wanted the new code to increase opportunities for affordable housing?
Can I answer that?
Sure. Yes.
Question? I mean, those are two different questions. Yes to the second. I'm in agreement that we should be creating and identifying more opportunities for affordable housing. I am not in agreement that we should include by right entitlements for missing middle housing unless there is an affordable housing component. And I had written language on my draft too that is no longer relevant because now the language is all different in the base motion. But I had suggested that by right entitlements, using the initial language, by right entitlement should be granted only when that entitlement carries with it the requirement to provide additional income restricted affordable housing units or in smaller projects in lieu fees.
Okay, so let me ask this
question.
question.
I have two issues with how we've been talking about missing middle. One is the one Councilmember Kitchen identified and that we talked extensively about Tuesday, which is, if you ask one person, we're talking about an ADU. If you ask the staff, they went from kind of 4 units to 6 units to 10 units. So I think that if we want to be non-prescriptive about how we're defining that, that's okay for now. But I think for me, I do not agree that we should include by right entitlements for missing middle housing without that component of affordable. So
help me. I'm still trying to understand questions. The amendment that's proposed by Councilmember Kitchen says that. Here's my question. We can't require an entitlement any entitlement we give to require affordable housing because that's inclusionary zoning. We can't say you get this zoning classification only if you do affordable housing. What we can do is we can say we're going to give you a missing middle category that has a bonus with it to provide affordable housing. So it seems to me, and Greg, you take a look at this. I'm not sure if this actually calibrates anything. The language that Mr. Flanagan offered with Councilmember Kitchen says that we should allow to increase the supply of smaller scale missing middle housing or through a density bonus that requires some measure of affordable housing. If we zone anything as a missing middle, a not smaller, but a larger missing middle housing component, that always carries with it a bonus provision so far. So it seems to me that by having a language here with the smaller scale still is okay, because it's still we're not calibrating anything. We're just saying if you give a smaller scale, it may not be able to have a bonus with it because bonus doesn't work. We can talk about that later. Or if you do anything else and you give an additional entitlement, it needs a dash A. It needs the ability for it to be able to scale up to give us greater affordable housing. That's my question. Mr. Casar.
My suggestion, now that I managed to narrow down my 5 or 6 sentences to a clause, would be instead of differentiating between small scale or middle scale missing middle housing, because we're going to be mapping a variety of those, would just to say to increase the supply of missing middle housing, which should include affordable housing bonus programs that are calibrated in all missing middle zones. Because all missing middle zones will have a density bonus, and in prior drafts, they all did have a density bonus, and we just want them properly calibrated.
Councilmember Alter.
So I'll probably have to come back to another point, but I want to just respond to your question, Mayor. There's nothing to stop us from zoning something single family or the single family equivalent or SF3 and saying we have a density bonus that allows you to go to the next level of missing middle if you meet an affordability requirement, which could in some cases be a fee in lieu, in some cases could be a unit. But we can do that. We don't have to start at missing middle as the starting point. You could start at single family, which has a duplex or has an ADU in that base zone or both, depending on the zone. And then you could say, if you want to go to a fourplex, you have to contribute X amount of money. Or if you contribute a full unit, you get something else, whatever it is in terms of what they would want in terms of the zoning entitlement. So we don't have to go from missing middle to missing middle with a bonus. You can start with single family and have a bonus so that you're getting the missing middle because you're doing something affordable. It may not be that if you go from an ability to have 3 units to 4 units that you can do a full unit as it, but we can have different kinds of calibration. Otherwise, we're just giving the entitlements and we don't have that opportunity to take advantage of that. And, for me, looking at the places this would be in my district, we would be really missing opportunities where financially they could pencil it out. And given the demand and the prices of housing in that area, if they can't make that pencil out, then we're just missing opportunities to improve our ability to deliver affordable housing.
Mr. Flanagan.
So this is where Councilmember Renteria and Harper Madison and I originally started by saying 3 units as a floor, and then that, to my mind, is roughly what smaller scale refers to. Probably 4 units is smaller scale, but nonetheless, that's where we were starting. And then to go to that second tier of missing middle, which has these small apartment complexes, 6 and 8, maybe 10 units, depending on the size of the lot. There'd be an affordability component to that, and that's where my comfort level is. And so, to me, it's this 3 tiers of, there's the by right entitlements that are the smaller scale missing middle, 3, maybe 4 units, depending on context. Then there's the missing middle that's bigger than that, which has an affordability component, which may be fee in lieu. And then there's the projects bigger than that, which are more on-site affordability requirements. And that's how I was thinking this through.
Yes, Councilor Tovo.
And so I get a little confused with the discussion of the bonus piece, but I think as you just explained it, how about language that says missing middle housing, something like missing middle housing larger than 3 units, which is where my comfort level is, will require an affordability component, either a fee in lieu or an income restricted, depending on the size of the project.
I think I have language already.
I think you do too. That's why I referenced it earlier. I think,
but it's under question 3. So
yeah, I think it's very relevant here, and I think it captures what Councilmember Flanagan was saying as well.
So I had it for my motion sheet 1 for question 3, but this same amendment 1 could be applied here, which was any increase in residential entitlements beyond 3 units per single family lot should only be allowed with an affordability requirement, which may take the form of on-site affordable housing or a fee in lieu. The requirement should be calibrated to incentivize the development of income-restricted affordable housing. We could add any increase in residential entitlements beyond 3 units per single family or missing middle lot. We probably need to add something to get it. We probably need another category beyond single family lot for addressing this part, but I think the rest of the language would meet the need here.
I think it works like it is, don't you? No?
Maybe it's per lot instead of single family lot. You don't need a single
Does
family
staff
lot.
have any ideas how we would wrestle with this?
I just think that's
Mr. Mayor?
Okay. Yes, Councilman Kitchen.
I think the language that
single family.
that Councilmember Alter has under her Amendment 1 question, it's motion sheet 1, question 3, Amendment 1. We could take that language.
Mayor,
I would
we'd have to
suggest
take
that.
single family out before lot.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem.
Oh,
sorry. This is so incredibly frustrating how weedy this is getting, but I don't understand what the problem is with leaving the language as it is. I can't believe I'm wordsmithing stuff. Oh my God. And say, leave it as is, but say, that staff can come back with recommendations when they believe it is not economically viable to have a density bonus. Like, just leave it open.
I appreciate the economic viability part of that, because that has been my concern.
So
Some of what's been suggested is not.
We're only increasing entitlements to increase the supply of missing middle or through a density bonus that requires some measure of affordable housing, and staff can bring back recommendations when they believe it's not economically viable to have a density bonus for affordability.
May I ask a question?
Okay, and then we want to get to staff.
So, Councilmember Garza, are you reading, maybe I'm reading this differently than you all. I was reading missing middle, since it was in I versus in double I. I wasn't reading double I to include missing middle, but it sounds like you are including double I to include missing middle. In other words, I was reading this to say that you get by right entitlements on missing middle, and then you only get by right with the density bonus on other kinds of housing. That's why I thought it needs, I think it needs further clarification. I don't think it says what we are all seem to be saying right now.
I think the second one was just not missing middle housing, but it was everything. It was saying that if you get an additional entitlement, it has to be something that would provide affordable housing through a density bonus.
But it says or there. So
That's right. So it's either missing middle housing or it's that other issue.
Yeah, that's what we're saying. We don't want it to be just missing
Staff, do you have any suggestions, sir?
Craig Dutton, Planning and Zoning. So what we had done in the past in previous drafts is with the consultant looked at missing middle housing and how the bonuses would pencil out. And where they didn't pencil out, they just were not in the code.
Right.
So for instance, in the R3 zones, we didn't have a bonus, but they started in the R4 zone. So I think we would look at that, of course, and just let you know where it works and where it doesn't work.
But that's different. But what you have in the code is if you map R3 zone or R4 zone, it has with it a density bonus. If you have that, you can build more with a density bonus. But what's being discussed is the concept of you only get the R3 or the R4 if you have a density bonus. So it's kind of like an SF3 has a density bonus that gets you to R4.
Right.
Is, I think, the question. Is that right? I mean, I think that's the issue.
So in that case,
in other words, you do it as a house. The question is, should we have a house scale zone that lets you get to that next level only if you provide affordability? We can't require that as part of just R4 because it's inclusionary zoning. The question is, if we step it up, can we require it, and is that a good thing to do? Councilmember Madison Harper.
I would just like to respectfully ask that the terminology we use reflect the current code and not draft 3, please.
Can you respond to that?
I can, for the purposes of this discussion.
I wasn't here for the last Code Next conversation, so not having land use as my subject matter expertise, I'm just familiar enough with the terminology to understand what's in the current code. But when you start to revert to the terminology that was in draft 3, then I have to use my handy dandy guidebook, and I'd rather just have you say it in a way that I am aware and informed, if that's okay. If everybody could just use the language that's in the current code, please. Thank you.
Do you have any thought on that?
Well, certainly for the purposes of this discussion, we can do our best to.
No, I mean, do that as best you can. The question
Sure.
I'm asking you to respond to is
the previous question. Well,
in other words, can we require a missing middle up zone from something that's not missing middle? If you're going to go into missing middle, there's a requirement for affordability, either a fee in lieu or an on-site, whatever calibrates.
So I think conceptually it's perfectly appropriate and makes sense, and we'd have to look at where it would go. But I think more than that, we'd have to try to figure out with the consultant if it would pencil out. I think previous discussions on previous drafts indicated that at the lower missing middle, 3 units per lot, that it was not as viable when you got compared to when you got into higher zones. So we would just have to look at that concept.
So I think that I would support the language of the smaller scale issue if there was an element of calibration put in there somewhere. Councilmember Tovo.
I have a proposal that we keep little I to increase the supply of missing middle housing, semicolon, any increase, and now I'm jumping to Councilmember Alters, any increase in residential entitlements beyond 3 units per lot should only be allowed with an affordability requirement which may take the form of on-site affordable housing or a fee in lieu. The requirement, however, should be economically viable and should be calibrated to incentivize the requirement, however, should be calibrated to incentivize the development of income-restricted affordable housing and should be economically viable. So I think that captures, we want the consultants or whoever is doing the calibration to tell us if that's economically viable, and they can figure out where and when that would apply.
My only concern would be Greg's question earlier. I don't know that 3 lots is the right. Is there a part of time where 4 lots would be the right number?
Can we not?
It seems that that's a calibration issue. So I wonder if there's a way to not pick the number of units, but just say do it where it can calibrate.
My
Is there a
concern
motion
is
on the table?
for a couple of us.
What?
Is there a motion on the table? Is there an amendment? Because I can make that amendment. I've got
I have some suggested
I
language.
think that Ann has an amendment. Councilmember Kitchen has an amendment, which is to add the phrase smaller scale.
Can I make an
And I
amendment?
accept Councilmember Tovo's amendment to that amendment.
It would be an amendment to the amendment, so we're
But
good.
I'd like to move an amendment to the amendment.
But I've already
So
accepted hers.
you don't get
That's
to
not
accept
good.
amendments. The amendments belong to the table. They're not yours when they come out. But let's talk through this and figure out what it is that's at issue.
Well, then let me see if I can explain.
Mayor?
Okay. I'm not going to take it. Go ahead.
Okay. So I think that we could say, I've tried to not be picking bonuses and bases on the dais, to have it say to increase the supply of missing middle housing, just the way it says, which shall include an affordable bonus program where economically viable. That way it could apply to small scale, large scale, mid scale, whichever scale where it's economically viable. So we're not picking what size right here on the dais, since it's going to pencil in different ways in different parts of the city.
Your suggestion was to increase the supply of missing housing,
Which shall include an affordable bonus program where economically viable.
which shall include an affordable housing bonus where economically viable. Councilmember Poole.
I have some language that is already written down, but it captures all of this so that we can allow the staff to do the calibration and bring it back to us. It says, if you look at my amendment sheet, the one that's motions 2 to 4 combined, on page 2, it lists the objective. The revised land development code should provide for housing capacity, et cetera. It does still say 2 to 3 times, and we have taken out the 2, and it's just 3. The piece that I want to point you to is the last sentence that begins with however. However, the measures used to achieve these housing capacity goals must be consistent with direction provided throughout this document and should be carefully calibrated with applicable density bonus programs. In general, additional by right entitlements provided through mapping and code revisions should only be used to increase the supply of missing middle housing. And this has the virtue of being language that was suggested by the staff for us to capture all of these comments that we're making here and allow the staff the ability to come back to us with what approach may be what they recommend. And also may keep us at a higher level, perhaps, in the discussion so that we can get through to the end of all the amendments that we're going to offer today. So again, that's on page 2 of the stapled motion sheet that I've provided on motions 2-4 combined. and it's the second sentence in the first underlined of red that begins with the word however.
May I make a...
Okay, continued discussion. Councilmember Tovo.
Thank you for signaling us to that passage. I think for me that doesn't resolve the fundamental issue that was in the first draft of the missing middle housing not being tied to income restricted units or fee and lieu. So I think that I'm comfortable with Councilmember Cassars with the caveat that as our discussion today and Tuesday revealed, there's we're sort of proceeding with vagueness around what that missing middle is going to be. I would have felt more comfortable tying it to 3 units as we were starting to, but at this point I think we've recognized the fundamental principle of tying, increasing the supply of missing middle to income restricted affordable units, and that resolves the concern for me.
Councilmember Kitchen.
Councilmember Cassar, could you read that again?
Yes, so it's just additional words on the Ellis Adler, where Ellis Adler says to increase the supply of missing middle housing. I have added, comma, which shall include an affordable bonus program where economically viable.
Affordable density or just
Affordable bonus
affordable?
program.
Well, it could be bonus, yeah.
Yeah, we should just say bonus because
Okay, that's
it goes sometimes beyond density.
Okay.
Which shall include an affordable housing bonus program where economically viable.
I think that's okay.
Anybody have an objection to that? Councilmember Flanagan.
So my only concern is I don't want to preclude the supply of missing middle housing without a bonus.
Right.
And so if we say increase the supply of housing, which shall include, if may include where economically viable, makes more sense to me.
I think shall include if it is viable. If it's not viable, it won't be included.
Right.
But my concern is the way the construction of the, I mean, and maybe staff is paying attention. I'm
Or
sure
we
they
can say
are,
when
is to say that we'll still do missing middle by right if the bonus is not viable.
Right.
I think that's the intent.
Okay.
I think it says that.
Okay.
Right? Which shall include an affordable housing bonus when economically viable, or where economically viable. Where economically viable.
Staff gets the point now.
I think it does. I think the point's made. Okay, I think we did that well. Yes. Oops. Maybe not. Councilmember Alter.
So I cannot really imagine a scenario where if it was a small fee, you couldn't do this in some area, or certainly in a lot of areas. I'm still think that there are situations where the way that we have this set up, we are going to provide missing middle by right, where we are just going to miss this opportunity to capture affordable contributions of some kind. Because if you go from a 4-plex to an 8-plex, and we're just putting that down by our initial mapping, you ought to be able to get some affordability program in there to get from that 4 to that 8. And if we just give them the 8, we don't get that. It doesn't have to be a huge amount, but all those things do contribute to affordability. And for some parts of the city, it is going to be the only way that you're going to get any affordable housing.
But doesn't this do?
Mayor.
Councilmember Flanagan.
I think, just to be clear, it sounded like what we were talking about is 3 or 4 units by right, depending on calibration, not 8. So I don't think anybody was saying that we're going to do 8 units without a program involved.
But aren't we doing that on the lot behind and the, I mean,
I think what you're saying is you can hardly imagine, given this sentence, that there'll ever be a place where this would ever happen because it's going to be economically viable to some degree everywhere. And I understand that. And if staff comes back and says that, I think that's great. But at least this language allows for the possibility otherwise, which I think gets us where our Venn diagrams cross.
But I think that when you then overlay this with some of the discussions about the transition, you get in situations where you are giving by right the 10 units, 12 units with no affordability requirement, when that is the only way you will get any affordable units in those areas. And that's a part that I'm very comfortable.
I think when we get to the transition section, let's make sure that the language there reflects this language here. Okay? Councilor Tovo.
And I would just say my hope is that the calibration will come back pretty close to what it was before, so that 4 units and up actually does have an affordable housing component, but it's certainly my intent not to support any kind of larger scale beyond 3 units that doesn't
Okay.
have an affordable housing component. But I agree with you that it becomes an issue with the transition that I hope we can collectively fix by the time we're done here at 4 in the
Okay.
morning.
Cool.
I had some.
All right, so that language is going to go in as suggested by Councilmember Kassar. No objection? That's done. All right, should we go to the next element in this, which was code text?
Before we get to code
Yes.
text, I wanted to get some clarification for the part that was on the corridor. So your original language, I understood. Can you walk me through what the change in language, either the mayor or Councilmember Ellis, means with respect to the corridors and by right entitlements? Because I thought I understood and we had gone through the other language, but
Which section again? Sorry.
so it is question 2, objective 1. There were sections that were deleted on page 3, A, I, and II, which seemed to help clarify what was happening on the corridor, and I'm not sure if that's carried over in the new language, and I'm just trying to understand what you meant when you deleted those.
Mine was, I believe that what was put into C does cover that. So if it's not clear, it seems like we were just trying to make something a little smoother in discussing new entitlements and areas like gentrification and displacement and things like that.
Did you want to add?
I think that the intent was is that this, with respect to corridors, because we're no longer talking about missing middle,
right?
That additional entitlements on the corridors would be the result of a density bonus.
Okay. And are you in work session? You had come to the conclusion that that should also be in terms of when you relax compatibility because you're getting increased entitlements. Is that still your interpretation of this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Kitchen.
Just
and then
a
Councilmember
question.
Poole, and then Councilmember Tovo.
Okay, I just had a question about the same language.
Okay.
Just for clarification, that's where it says currently are susceptible to gentrification. Can I assume that what we mean here is tied back to the uprooted study?
I would certainly think that would be one source that they would reference. I don't.
Well, the reason I'm
not
asking
sure.
is in some places we use the term, and we do talk about the uprooted report. In other places we don't. I just want it to be clear. I just wanted to understand that because the term currently are susceptible to gentrification, I just think we should tie that back. And I think the uprooted report is fine. I mean, that's the data point that we have.
And I would
So-
say, I was just trying not to limit them to that, but certainly Uprooted is a really good document, but if there's something else, there's another study that comes out, or there's another study that informs that issue, I don't want them to be precluded from that. But obviously, we all know that we did do the Uprooted report that talks about this issue, but the general statement is we don't want to grant new entitlements in areas that are currently susceptible to gentrification as stated here.
Okay, that's fine. I'll just want the staff to explain to us when they come back how they defined it, because we just need to know what we're talking about.
I think that would be reasonable. Councilor Poole was next.
So on the change to code text A, am I correct?
Hang on a second, we're not to code text A yet.
I thought-
I mean, I called that, but I didn't know if people were like ready to go yet.
I thought that's what
we
we
do
were
have it's now 5:25, we have a public hearing that I said we would try to knock out before dinner, 3 people to speak, and then everybody can leave before dinner. Do we want to, before we get to a new issue, do we want to do that fast?
You read my mind. I was going to suggest
that.
Yeah.
Could I be the one to pick up when we come back? I just wanted a clarification.
Unless something has anything new in 1, you'll be the first person to raise
Okay.
something in 2.
Thanks.
But before we raise additional ones in 2, do we want to do the public hearing and then come back to finish 1?
But I do have amendments before we get to 2.
Okay, now the amendments. And the amendments that we'd be drafting would not be in one, this is not the time to do amendments to 1C generally, or 1 generally. It's to address the amendments that were raised. We're trying not to just open up the section. I think if we get through this, we'll have gotten through a lot of the hard issues that we have, and I think that it'll enable us to move more quickly. And I think even these things are hard. I think we've just solved two of the really tricky issues that we had in a way that works. Let me go now to the public hearing. Let's call that. This would be item number 72. Staff here for that?
Mayor?
We're going to give you a chance to take care of this so you guys can go home.
I need to step away. My daughter just got here, and it is her 9th birthday. Happy birthday, Magnolia. I'll see you guys after dinner.